What is up, everybody? Solomon here. Super excited to be with Genfinity, and this is the Hedera End-of-Year Community Call. This is going to be absolutely massive, but before we get started, wanted to touch base with you all on this Hedera Community Survey. The Hedera ecosystem appreciates your inputs, and everybody that you're going to see here today is continuously in the weeds with strengthening and enhancing the community experience. So there's a QR code up here, and please scan that with your phone, participate in the survey, and you get to drive the future path of the Hedera ecosystem. Today's conversation is going to be absolutely massive. It's organized around three core areas. The first, you're going to see a leadership panel with absolute legends from Leemon Baird, Mance Harmon, Charles Adkins, Eric Piscini, Kamal Yousefi. We're going to then move into technical insights, and we've got a HEATS panel, Hedera Enterprise Adoption Team, with Chair Com from the Hedera Council. And then we're going to close everything out today with Ed Marquez, head of DevRel. That being said, we're going to hop right in today, and our leadership panel is up right now. So let's bring everybody up. Awesome. All right. So little time and a lot to get through. It has been an absolutely wild year. I want to start kind of with Mance. In 2025, it was very apparent for those of us paying attention that global institutions began moving from just testing DLT to integration starting to actually go live across core systems. What changed, and what does that signal about where the world is heading? And thank you, everybody, for joining today. But over to you, Mance.
Okay, well, thank you, Brian. It's good to be here with you and the community here at the end of 2025. It's been a fantastic year. It's been a very exciting year. Look, what changed? In a word, 2 words, Donald Trump. Donald Trump changed the market. And the way he changed the market was by bringing in an SEC leadership team that is not antagonistic to the crypto industry in the way that the prior administration's team was. And what that means is that the industry and primarily the finance industry was effectively given permission to participate in a way that they previously didn't feel like they could. There's been a lot of pent-up demand for a lot of years. People have known the value associated with the tech and how it can be applied for finance in particular. I'm not just focusing on finance. Obviously, there's a lot of cool stuff going on more generally in just enterprise and large scale use cases. But finance is kind of special at the moment because the world of finance now feels at liberty to move forward in a way that they didn't prior to the new administration. And that is having ripple effects around the globe. You know, now that the US is getting involved and setting the rules that are required to regulate the industry, it's a race. And that's affected the industry. It's affected us as a project. It's helped to shape our strategy going forward as a project, which I'm sure we're going to touch on. But it's just the world of difference has happened because we now have an administration that's willing to move forward as opposed to try and hold things back.
100%. Oh, go ahead. Who's got it next?
Yeah. So yes, so there's some regulatory clarity in the United States anyway, which has been enormously helpful. Also, I think we're finally seeing come to fruition a lot of POCs and thinking about it and planning it and exploring it. And then this really was the year where a lot of the financial institutions were deciding, yes, this is a real thing for finance. And so we got permission for ETFs and things. We have derivatives and things being done on it. And we have the big financial players buying into it. And I think that it's a long process. They move very slowly, and it has taken them years to decide, is this really something we want? And this is the year where it really did come to fruition. And they were saying this is something we want. And so regulatory clarity in one country was enormously helpful, but also just the world as a whole, I think, was getting to the point of maturity where it moves from POC to real world. And this is the year when we saw it go to real world. And that meant financial things. And this is sort of a theme I think we're going to have. I think what we can see is that people are realizing that it's useful for real things that involve real money. This is serious now. It's great. And the thing I love the most is I'm not sitting here saying, in 2026, I think it's finally going to become real. I don't have to say that. 2025, it became real. I just love it.
I'd love to hear from Eric, from your viewpoint as well. I think all of you guys maybe have a little bit of a different take on this, but you guys have been dealing with certainly a lot of enterprise and a lot of kind of the technical work coming out of the Hashgraph stance. But Eric, your thought on why we're starting to see more kind of real world applications going live, and it seems like the past, like I said, 12 to 18 months really just ramped up compared to the entire history previously.
Yeah, and as you guys know, I've been in this industry for 13 years now. So finally we get there, right? Finally we get real adoption of the technology by real businesses, large-scale businesses. I think, in addition to what happened outside of our control, which is a regulatory environment and the adoption, what we also did inside, every one of these organizations here on the call today, is also very interesting, right? Because you could say, great things happen outside of my control and I don't do anything and that I just serve, right? But we didn't. We actually did a lot of things to benefit from that wave. And that's why, for example, we launched Hashsphere, which is a private version of Hedera, because we saw that the adoption by the enterprise market was very critical to our success. And they needed a private version of Hedera in addition to the public version. So we launched it, right? We didn't sit and wait. We actually were all of us very proactive in launching new solutions, new services. At the foundation, the work that the foundation did on the ecosystem and the liquidity is tremendous. And that's a huge lift for all of us as well, right? So there is a lot of excitement there. But at the same time, you have to reflect back when Leemon and Mance started this project, and they set the stage for us to be here today, continuing to be the adults in the room. And when you go into the enterprise market, being the adult in the room is a very big deal, right? With the fixed fees, the governing council, the fair ordering, all of those things that we keep talking about for many, many years, those resonate really, really well today because of the investment made over the last 7 years.
I think that's going to be a theme that we probably hear a lot of today, is just kind of the maturity of the ecosystem and all of the players within the ecosystem. Kamal, I want to ask you as we kind of move forward. Same question, but I mean, you have an interesting viewpoint here coming out of the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. We've seen a ton of adoption there, and more adoption, and compared to what we've seen in the United States. But this year, these past 18 months, what does it look like from your guys' purview and what you're witnessing there with things going live, things like that?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having us here in this session. And I can fully echo what Mance and Leemon and Eric mentioned before. Actually, if you want to summarize the reason behind the mass, or let's say the mainstream adoption when it comes to Web3 solutions in general or DLT-enabled use cases, you can look into 4 factors. Number one is the legal certainty and the mature regulatory frameworks that has been established across different jurisdictions from strategic regions, plus the support that we have received from President Trump since last year. That changed the entire equation and changed how businesses, governments, and regulators look into the digital assets and Web3 business in general. Number two, a second critical and crucial factor is enhanced maturity when it comes to use cases and when it comes to the business viability of the different use cases with great flagship projects. Basically, we have seen great asset tokenization projects, digital identity solutions deployed and adopted by great and top-tier banks and large corporates, which is confirming their legal certainty and their view when it comes to Web3 adoption. Number 3, in my view, is a reasonable balance between Web3 solutions and existing legacy systems. So we're no longer competing with Web3 existing systems, but we are kind of looking how can we build viable and value contributing Web3 solutions that are leveraging the existing systems and the core systems without kind of competing with these existing systems. And last but not least is the increased institutional capital dedicated for Web3 investments, be it through structured products, be it ETFs or ETPs or sell-ins or others. And also the support coming from investors that are looking to invest in DLT-enabled businesses and Web3 investment cases in general. So if you look at these factors in general, that's what you need to have a vibrant ecosystem. So you need talent. That's something that we have supported by providing training and certification over the last few years. You need infrastructure and regulatory frameworks and legal certainty for entrepreneurs and builders to design, develop, and deploy their businesses and commercialize them. The third factor, as I mentioned earlier on, is the capital and the funding. And once we have all these factors together, that's what you need to have a thriving community within a vibrant ecosystem. And that's what we have succeeded in building within Hedera Hashgraph.
Awesome. Yeah, certainly a flywheel effect and lots of different cogs in the wheel. I want to ask Charles, because I think, you're certainly suited to answer this question as well. And, Hedera Foundation has made massive strides this past year. So I think a huge kudos to you guys. Your just take, in general, we're starting to see a lot more go live. You guys are obviously instrumental in a lot of that stuff going live from the Hedera ecosystem viewpoint. And I would love maybe just kind of your broad take, Charles.
Yeah, kind of echoing what people have said so far, but one of the things that I would say is people are starting to educate themselves more about what Hedera is and how it was originally structured. And that's creating a really big impact on them wanting to adopt this technology. When, you look at the three different types of blockchains out there, the public and permissionless, and then you have private and permissioned, and then you have Hedera, which is public but permissioned. And with regulatory clarity, a lot of people started diving into, hey, let's educate ourselves on this area. And what they're finding out is, wow, we're pretty comfortable with this. This is exactly how the internet is set up. DNS root servers are permission, and the public has access to all of it. And then guess what? Institutional grade everything for retail users, just like Google, Gmail, G Drive. But guess what? Institutions use it too. And so you get this situation where, Hedera, a lot of our ecosystem, internally, we use Gmail to send messages. You may have an individual Gmail address, but somehow those still get delivered to each other because it's institutional grade for everybody. So when people kind of got the green light from Trump to go and investigate this stuff, well, guess who's the only blockchain that's kind of set up exactly like the internet? It's permissioned with the governing council, and it's accessible to the public. And guess what? How do new network upgrades roll out to the internet? Well, it goes through a process from ICANN and IANA that looks pretty dang similar to how HIPs happen. And then those are deployed by the council. So we have this situation where now people have the green light to investigate, and the investigation is returning that Hedera actually set up just like the internet, and that makes them pretty comfortable with using us. So once we saw that timing start to happen, the foundation really wanted to pour gas on that fire and say, hey, look, now the light bulb's clicking on for everyone. How do we make sure that you have the financial capability to actually adopt this? So really, we were kind of waiting around for the timing, but the original structure that Leemon and Mance set out, it was familiar to everybody. They just needed the green light to go and do the investigating.
I think, you bring up a really interesting point, and kind of this was kind of the intentional lead-in of this question, where we are seeing a lot more go live. And if you kind of look, as Charles mentioned, and kind of in that purview, the Hedera network seems to be positioning itself as kind of the trust layer of this new digital economy. So given that, I'm going to ask all of you guys if you can kind of touch base on what you feel like a global trust layer needs to deliver. And why is Hedera uniquely built to serve in that role? Leemon, I see you ready to go.
I love the question. To become the trust layer of the internet, the utility the entire planet needs, you need a network that's fast, fair, secure. This is very, very important. but you even more need one that is well governed. You have got to be able to trust the governance. And there is a natural tendency for projects to end up saying, oh, everybody can help run our project. And it ends up being a handful of people, and you don't know who they are. And they're sort of self-appointed. And it's a few people in smoke-filled rooms making the decisions. It's a few developers or a few pool owners or some mining or some staking pool owners or hashing pool owners. And you end up with a few people with unlimited control over the system. You don't know who they are or how they're making their decisions. This is not the way to do it. This isn't how ICANN and INIA, the ones you were just talking about, work with the DNS. This is not how you run something that everyone on the planet is going to depend on. What you need is transparent governance. You need to make sure that there are truly independent entities that are governing it, and you know who they are, and they have a reputation that they care about, and you see the minutes of their meetings, and you know what's going on. And so what is it that the world really needs? They need something that is fast, fair, and secure. Absolutely, this is what they need. But they also need something that is well governed so that they can trust it. This is the key to providing the Web3 world that really started this year and is just continuing to grow in the future.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. When we started all of this back in 2017, the model was incredibly controversial, right? I mean, you either loved Hedera or you hated Hedera in the industry. I mean, now the industry back then was a lot more tribal than it is today. And we've matured as an industry. But when it comes to building real world financial use cases on infrastructure like this, it's not controversial. It's anything but, right? If you don't have some kind of model that provides the transparency in who's operating the validator nodes and the governance associated with the protocol and the network, it's a non-starter. You don't even get considered. So what we have in Hedera is the right model for the emerging wave of finance-related use cases. It's the right governance model. It's the right operational model. And now with Hashgraph or Hashsphere, the private network version of the protocol, that completes the suite that is needed for adoption. When we look at these use cases that are on the cusp of going mainstream, the finance-related use cases specifically is what I'm thinking of. Those are going to have elements of both. There will be private network instances running that support those use cases, bridge to public networks. The bridge between Hashsphere and Hedera is going to be fantastic in terms of security and cost and performance, unlike anything else in the market. We have sort of a trifecta of tech and governance and trust that is needed for this coming wave. And it's very exciting. We're exactly positioned where we need to be.
I want to ask Eric, because
let me add,
go ahead.
I'll add on to that real quick. Just kind of to what Mance was saying, and I use a lot of times I use this Google and Gmail and Google G Suite analogy because it's simple for somebody like me to understand. But the dynamic between Hashsphere and the public mainnet, I'll give you an example of why that's so powerful. So you have your own instance of G Suite, or let's say it's a G doc, and you go in and you want to set the permissions of share settings. You can make somebody an editor, commenter, or a viewer only, or you can share that. And when you share that with somebody outside of your private network, an alert will pop up and it says you're about to share this with somebody of the public. This is exactly how Hashsphere and the mainnet will work together. And this is the thing, is when you are sending messages within a Hashsphere, within your organization, it's completely secure. Do you want someone to be a commenter, a viewer, an editor of, well, obviously, editing is going to be difficult on a Hashgraph, but, same type of thing. You start to share that outside of your network, and, here we are again. These are things that were constructed from the very beginning. We just get excited about it now because people are starting to realize this is what's been in Leemon and Mance's head for 15 years now. So, it's finally starting to come to fruition, be built, and people are starting to understand it through analogy of things that they use every single day. It's just now you're going to have the trusted layer of the internet. And I will tell you that with AI coming in, when I open open the internet and open my feed and I see, videos of Queen Elizabeth body slamming Hulk Hogan, that's not really the type of the internet that's probably going to last forever. You need to have some proof of humanity in there. And that's what, having Hashspheres run with mainnet completely verified in a system that already runs like the internet, it's going to work well for everybody. Sorry, Eric, I cut off your question there.
That was great. And I think you make a really valid point too, which is it has to make sense to people based on what they're already using. And I think that's kind of where we're headed towards. And I think everybody can attest to the fact that trust and authenticity are quickly becoming one of the world's most scarcest assets. But Eric, I want to ask you from the Hashsphere standpoint, who better to develop trust than these enterprises and institutions themselves? And I think a Hashsphere really gives them that opportunity to build up that level of confidence that they would need in a secure environment. And you had a really good kind of branding phrase of Hashsphere. I don't know if you'll say it in here in relation to mainnet, but feel free to take it as far as the trust standpoint. Eric, would love your thoughts on trust.
Yeah, I think, and Charles used a really good example, but I'll tell you what's happening in the network, in the market, right? So what we were working on is trying to convince large organizations with a lot of regulatory constraints, data residency, and so on, to use a public ledger. And when you say public ledger to them, they were closing the code right away, right? They just couldn't engage. And I was tired of saying no. We don't have a solution for you, right? I want to be able to say yes to them and offer them something. So when we get together as an executive team at Hashgraph and we said, okay, we have to address that need, Hashsphere was a very natural extension of what we do today. And the way we think of Hashsphere is an entry point, a gateway to using the code base of Hedera, but also probably at some point to use a public ledger, right? But we don't want to create that friction up front. So we want to say, engage with us, start building, start using. If you want to stay on the Hashsphere, if you want to remain closed and private forever, good, you can do that. We believe that at some point you will need to be exposed or connected or bridged or completely integrated into the public ledger. You have an opportunity to do that as well. So the optionality is really what we offer to the market. Really, really important, because now we don't say no to our clients. We always say yes. And I like to say that.
100%. And I want to ask Kamal, I know from the Hashgraph Association standpoint, there's been a lot of real world adoption that has been built on trust. I think of the interview I did with BIA Group. So that's, I believe, one of the largest sustainability waste management out of like the UAE, and PwC is another one that rings a bell. I would love your take on global trust and why Hedera is just uniquely suited for a role like this.
Absolutely. To start with, a lot of kudos to Mance and Leemon. I mean, Hedera, when it has been kicked off and started back in 2017 and 18, it was a unique time. And then back at the time in 2017, we had basically two categories of blockchain solutions. We had the public ledgers, and back at the time we had Bitcoin and Ethereum. And then we have the private ones, which is Hyperledger and Corda. And then Hedera came like in a very interesting time and fill in the gap, which is
Kamal froze on us. All right, so we'll let's try to get. He's going to come back in, so we'll go right back to him. So I'm going to move forward, and then when Kamal comes back in, we'll try to get him back on that question. But we've had a ton of real world signals this year as well, and some of these are recent. And there's no way I'm going to be able to encompass all of these, even on a daily basis, probably. But more recently, Nation of Georgia's Memorandum of Understanding, Project Acacia with the Reserve Bank of Australia. The integration of Hedera Guardian with Vera, which is the world's largest independent sustainability standards body, a wave of enterprise and institutional deployments. What do these milestones tell you about Hedera's trajectory as global digital infrastructure? Are there any milestones that particularly stand out to you guys? Before we get to that question, I'm going to go back to Kamal because we have audio.
Thank you. I was saying that a lot of kudos to Mance and Leemon for initiating the project Hedera. Back at the time, we had only two categories. We have the public ledgers and the fully private permissioned ones. The public ones back at the time, we had Bitcoin and Ethereum, and we have the private versions, which is Corda and Hyperledger. And Hedera was like well positioned to fulfill the gap between these two both worlds. With other words, Hedera was designed and implemented in a way that is addressing the needs for decentralized applications by providing a public ledger that is accessible for individuals, but also for businesses and enterprises, but at the same time is addressing the needs when it comes to governance and maintaining the network. Imagine you are dealing with
some technical
banks,
panel that
or
we
highly
just
regulated organizations. You still need to have that established trust by having trusted and credible and reliable organizations managing and maintaining the network. So to answer your question, the 4 or the 6 levels that we have been building over the years to establish a vibrant ecosystem for Hedera can be summarized in 6 levels. Number 1 was the governance. That's something that Mance and Leemon elaborated and explained, which was needed to establish the credibility and the trust to be enterprise grade, basically get the trust and the support from enterprises, but at the same time be accessible for innovators, builders, startups, and small and mid-sized enterprises. The second level was the network, and our colleagues at Hashgraph did an amazing and understanding work in having implementing Hedera Hashgraph capabilities, which is one of the best, be it from a performance perspective with a minimum of 10,000 transactions per second, be it in terms of the low cost associated to the transaction fees, or with the genius idea of denominating the transaction fees to dollars, which gives enterprises some sort of predictability and stability when it comes to having and approving their business models. They don't have to care about the crypto market. They just know exactly one single transaction costs me XYZ dollars. The third level was basically the ecosystem, which was needed to, number 1, attract and most importantly retain talent, because this is pretty much needed for the Web3 businesses. So the builders and the developers are basically the driving engine within all the Web3 projects. Number 2, dedicating funding in terms of grants. And I believe back in September 2021, the council approved $5 billion worth of HBARs allocated for the ecosystem development activities, all the way up to different incubation and acceleration programs that we have either deployed within the Hashgraph Association and the foundation, or in partnerships with externals. The third level or the fourth level after the ecosystem is venturing, and that's something that we successfully closed and implemented last week and announced during Abu Dhabi Finance Week. Basically, the continuation for all the great projects that have successfully completed the grant program, but now they are in a stage where they need scale-up funding so that they can expand their businesses, expand their operations, and bring their businesses to the next level. The other 2 levels that are remaining so that we can close the loop and have a symbiotic ecosystem is products and services. And I believe with HashSphere and with the studios that our colleagues at Hashgraph have implemented and deployed over the years are key building blocks that are enabling that, let's say, fully integrated and cohesion ecosystem. And last but not least, which is needed is professional services, basically deploying resources to help enterprises, startups to consume these products and deploy them smoothly in a way that we create value for Hedera community, for the ecosystem, but also for their businesses. So if you look at these 6 levels from the top to down, it's basically a validation. So the more professional services we are able to deploy in the market, it validates the maturity of the products. The more products we bring to the market, it validates the work that the Ventures is doing in terms of picking up great high growth potential use cases from the grant programs and helping them with scale-up funding. The more ecosystem and vibrancy we get in the ecosystem, it confirms the enterprise readiness of Hedera platform. And then the more transactions and the more builders we get and the more businesses we manage to attract to build on Hedera, it confirms our unique governance model, and vice versa. And also from the bottom to the top, it's validation or it's enablement. So the governance enables the network enables the ecosystem feeds the interest, supports the products, and the products are the enablers for professional services.
100%. So I'm going to go,
Yeah.
I'm going to move us back into milestones. And I know we have a good list of questions here still remaining. So we'll try to keep the answers a little bit concise so we can get through all of this. And I mentioned previously Nation of Georgia's Memorandum of Understanding, Project Acacia, Reserve Bank of Australia, Hedera, Guardian, and Bair, the world's largest sustainability standards body. There's so many milestones, and I'm going to kind of go roundtable here because I don't know if we have to, and this is going to continue to be a trend, I would imagine. Leemon, I'll let you start, and then we'll just go around.
Okay, I'll try to be very fast. Everything of value in the world will end up tokenized and traded on ledgers because it is more efficient. You can fractionalize things, you can enforce things. You don't need middleman parties, third parties. There's too many reasons for it. It's the same reason all the information went to databases. We don't have scraps of paper holding all the world's information. This will happen. But how does that happen? Well, at the very top of the pyramid, we have to have tokenized assets, and people are doing that. Gold and silver and real estate and so on being tokenized on Hedera. But we need a lot of infrastructure of the pyramid below that. So what do you need? Hey, I can tokenize my house and sell it. Okay, but how do they know that that's actually, this token really does apply to your house? You need the country itself to be doing registries. And Hedera has this MOU with the country of Georgia to start doing things like registries. You have to have that. The tip of the pyramid is, hey, we can tokenize things like property. But unless you have the national registries and these other things happening, it becomes very difficult to prove that this token really does represent the thing it's tokenizing. So you need that. And then how are you going to buy and sell things? Well, you have to be able to buy and sell for money in some sense. You need stablecoins. You need stablecoins as the lubricant to make the whole system work. And so you have Project Acacia in Australia where they're doing things like stablecoins. And maybe someday we have CBDCs. There's all sorts of things that you do where you're tokenizing the money so that you can have the lubrication to make the system working. And then just goes on. We're talking about, well, who's going to be doing the buying and selling? Humans? Sure. AIs? We have people like Equity Lab. They're doing, how do you trust the AIs? And we're using Hedera for that. So I won't go through all the answers, but this pyramid is enormous. And the bottom line is that we are seeing real people in the real world building each piece of this pyramid on Hedera right now, which is leading us to the future where everything is tokenized.
Who wants to go next with a milestone?
I'll double click on what Leemon said. I think the race to tokenization is on, right? Across the board, every single asset in the world is going to be tokenized. And the sooner you are, the better you are as an asset manager, for example, or as an identity provider, or as a cash management company. The sooner you tokenize, the better, because you're going to benefit from that technology. I think, today, if you're in the community and you're wondering, where should I invest my time? I would definitely invest my time into what does it take to tokenize an asset and make it available to a lot of people in the world so those people can interact with this asset. It's not a blockchain discussion anymore, it's a tokenization discussion. And I'm going to leave it to, when we were in Sibos a few weeks ago, I was expecting Sibos to be the typical financial industry conference where everybody was talking about payments and AI. And the majority of the discussions were tokenization of cash, of currencies, of assets, of real estate. It was just about tokenization. So the race is on.
It's really interesting. And for those that aren't aware, Sibos is Swift's annual event. So that was pretty awesome seeing you guys and the Hedera ecosystem represented there. Milestones, Charles, I'm going to go over to you. Hedera Foundation, I know certainly had some.
I mean, I'll just give, two quick points on this. A lot of the projects that you mentioned, and probably more that you're going to hear in 2026, are people that we've been talking to for years that have been telling us no because Hashsphere didn't exist. So now you're starting to see those come live because they do have the optionality of a private network. To Leemon's point, the verification of what an asset is and the prevention of several layers of synthetic assets can only be done through the provenance of tokenization. And this is, going to help with a lot of the financial health of the world in general. But just kind of giving a look into the future and touching on what Eric said about how all pieces of data or tokens or whatever they may be, they all have value to them. And I'll give you a really funny insight. I won't say the names of who this was, but we had a very large system integrator who I had a conversation with, who's about to launch 100,000 AI agents out into their workforce. They asked, how do we prove these agents were permissioned by us? But here's a couple layers deeper that'll give you a look into the future. How do we register them on Workday as employees? And then you ask the question, why do you want them registered as employees? Well, obviously, when these AI agents are trained, we're going to want to upload that information into robotic workers, which may or may not have health and maintenance insurance plans. Okay, so when you start thinking like that, you're like, who administers my robot's insurance plan? Is it my auto carrier? Is it my health carrier? They're all employees on Workday. So this is the kind of thing that, these large organizations are thinking about is, and how do you verify that? You have to do that on a ledger. Like, you can't just have a rogue robot worker out there making insurance claims for itself and collecting money to give to who. And I know this sounds like really out of the world, to people, but if you told people 5 years ago what AI would be doing today, they would also think you're crazy. So it's not that far off that major companies are thinking how to ensure their robot workforce on Workday. And you have to have a private network that connects to a public ledger for auditability to go to a regulatory, some part of the government to verify these things, just like, Department of Employment and all of that stuff. So these things are happening. And to have that happen on Ledger is about the only way you can pull that off.
Yeah,
we're living in a science fiction world.
Yeah, and I think there's still so much education out there. Just as a quick sidebar, like I was out to dinner with my wife a week ago, and I overheard a guy at the table next to us that was saying all the actors in Hollywood went on strike last year because of Sophia, the UN robot. And I'm like, I don't think that's what happened. Mance, milestones from your end, and then Kamal, and then.
Well, just to piggyback on what Charles is saying. So if I had to choose a milestone from the list that you've mentioned, I would certainly go with Project Acacia and RBA. And the reason for that is because it's just the tip of the iceberg that represents so much future usage and demand. And it's foundational to just about everything else that's been discussed here. So I know I know the project that Charles was just mentioning. And when you think about the systems in the enterprise that are concerned with this sort of thing, you think about HR, you think about treasury management, you're thinking about the finance function, et cetera, et cetera. And for that reason, I think it's appropriate for Hedera in the future to continue to care about ESG and AI and tokenization, but through the lens of a finance function. And so it's not a change, but it's a narrowing of scope that is common. It's still kind of horizontal in its function. It's certainly horizontal across these categories of use cases that we care about, but it represents sort of the what we see emerging in the market today, and that's what I'm excited about. I've always thought that the mainstream finance players would be the ones to really take advantage of this category of technology in a big way, before the startups. In the world of Web3, we got all the startups that exist, and they're important that they exist because they sort of do all the experiments for the industry and they show the way. But the mainstream players are going to be the ones to make the big money first, unfortunately. But and they're the one, but they're not going to do it alone. They're going to do it in collaboration with organizations like Hedera that are providing that foundational layer of infrastructure that's required for them to be going to market. And it's always been about money. It's always been about the transfer of value. I mean, foundationally, fundamentally, that's what a ledger is useful for. And now we're going to be able to take advantage of that. And it's here. It's happening in 2026.
Milestones, Kamal, from your end, sir. Two
from-
minutes. I want to try to get through the
Okay.
rest of the questions here.
No worries. I would. From my point of view, I think there are two key milestones. Number one is the play or the interplay between private ledger or the private ledger of Hedera ecosystem, which is Hashgraph, and the mainnet. Hashgraph is there to address the needs for privacy, GDPR, and data protections for highly regulated institutions, while the mainnet is still serving the community, the builders and entrepreneurs, and the ones that have favorable regulatory frameworks to build and deploy their solutions on Hedera mainnet. Number two is the fusion of Hedera and AI technologies, which can be a groundbreaking development that will result in a new era of innovation within Hedera ecosystem. And here I do see Hedera as the underlying infrastructure that supports and enables decentralized applications and solutions with a transparent and a public ledger, while AI contributes with the cognitive capabilities needed to analyze data, optimize processes, facilitate decision-making, all the way up to automate the executions of these decisions. With other words, the overlap, or better said, the convergence of these two powerful technologies ramped up within the unique governance model of Hedera Hashgraph, I think goes beyond traditional boundaries, and we will see innovative and pioneering business models and use cases evolving within Hedera ecosystem that are leveraging Hedera Hashgraph capabilities in conjunction with AI cognitive capabilities.
I think that's really well put, and it leads me perfectly into kind of all of these pillars of tooling out there that have taken, I'm sure, a lot of work to get to the point of how sophisticated yet how simple they are. So we're talking Hashsphere, we're talking Stablecoin Studio, AI Studio, Asset Tokenization Studio, Hedera Guardian, I think would fall under that as well. Kamal, I'm going to stay with you here. And so for everybody up here, let's try to go maybe a little bit quicker, rapid fire, so we can get through this. How are these tools adding value to enterprise and government decision-making? How are they enabling rapid deployment? And I think from your purview, Kamal, you guys just wrapped up the Hedera Africa Hackathon with massive numbers. And I'm sure that there were individuals leveraging the different tooling and things like that. But yeah.
I think you are referring to the studios, to the AI Studio and Stablecoin Studio and to the Guardian, all the way up to the Asset Tokenization and NFT Studio, correct?
Yep.
Yes. In my view, these are powerful building blocks, which are open sourced, made available to the community, to the businesses, be it enterprises or startups, with modular toolkits that are custom developed and custom designed for Hedera Network, which are also leveraging the core services. These open source SDKs and studios, they provide developers, builders with a wide range of services and tools that help these builders to speed up the transition from a business concept toward a live use case that is implemented on the mainnet. We had very good and positive feedback from the community, more specifically from the hackathon, where we had over 50,000 individuals participated in the hackathon, and over 1,300 projects have been submitted. The majority of them leveraged at least one of these studios, be it the Stablecoin Studio or the Guardian or the AI Studio. It was massive help for the builders and the participants. When it comes to the enterprises and governments, an enterprise, before they start picking up the DLT ledger that they are going to build on, of course, they look at the products, they look at the product suite that you have, they look at the SLAs that you are offering around these products. And there is a hidden component that they are also looking at, which is how big is the developer community? How many people do understand the technology and build on the technology, and what is available there in terms of frameworks, processes, tools that can be reused and can be leveraged to bootstrap the development of Hedera-powered projects. And let's also keep in mind these tools that our colleagues at Hashgraph have built and designed specifically for the ecosystem are the consolidation of years of projects with enterprises, with governmental entities and startups, where basically we consolidated that and then we come up with a unified tool and framework to be reused and deployed again for comparable use cases and solutions.
I think that's huge. I'm going to go round robin here, and I guess I'll go to Leemon next. How does all the tooling on Hedera enable? And I should say briefly here, because I know we're probably going to run out of time. I've interviewed a lot of these kind of business, like these kind of middle organizations that obviously do some of the implementations, the PricewaterhouseCoopers, BCGX, and thank you, Kamal, for helping to put together some of those interviews. And I hear very similar things from all of them, which is we need to get to the point to being able to rapidly deploy solutions. And this is the tooling that does that. So Leemon, I would love your take on rapid deployment, how important that is.
Yeah, what you said. We have experiment. The whole world's finances are moving on to Web3, like Matt said. How do you do that? You need things to enable it. So you need stable coins. Well, how do you build stable coins? You need tools to make it easy to build programs with stable coins. So you need Stablecoin Studio to make it easy for you to do that. Oh, and what else do you need? Well, you have carbon credits are of value, but before you can do that, you have to have tools for tracking it. So we have Guardian that helps you to track that. We have AI is going to be trading these things and a big part of this financial system. Well, how do you trust the AI? Well, we have people like every lab doing that on Hedera, but how do you even implement these AIs and make them work with Hedera? You need AI Studio. It's all about the tools. So to make the goal is all of the world's finance moves onto Hedera or onto ledgers in general, but specifically Hedera. To do that, there's a bunch of things that we need to enable it. And to enable the enablers, you have to have the tools. That's the answer.
Yeah, Ryan, I want to add one thing that we are not mentioning yet, but all those tools are valuable because we have amazing teams helping developers use those tools, right? The developer advocates shoot out to them, developer relationship teams, and many, many others are really the one making sure that the community understands and use those tools properly and then continue to improve those tools based on community input. I want to make sure that we don't lose that in the process, right? The tools are great, but the people making those tools great are even more important in my mind. And I want to call that out.
I think, there's so many to probably mention in that regard. I think of all the amazing work, Brandon and Hgraph. And what's crazy to me is to see that you have relationships between Project Acacia going on with Reserve Bank of Australia as kind of like one of the solutions integrators with the stuff that they were building out of Hgraph. And we'll learn a lot more about that probably in the next call too, from the tech standpoint. So gigantic shout out to the entire Hedera developer community and all of the builders out there. We will not be able to mention them all, and I don't want to make anybody angry here. I want to get us into the next kind of questions we move forward here. Across industries represented, I'm going to start with you, Mance, here, because I think you're best served here. Across industries represented on the council, which is very diverse. Anybody can go and look at the Hedera Council. So many different facets, so many different industries out there that are represented on that council. Where did you see the biggest movement? Maybe it's finance, because you guys alluded to it earlier. From proof of concept to production in 2025, which sectors look positioned to scale in 2026? Are there any industries or use cases flying under the radar? Mance, I will stop rambling and let you take it.
No, well, look, maybe I should have reserved these comments from earlier, but they're the same ones, right? I think that what's happening is that from the very beginning, Hedera was intentionally horizontal in its focus on use cases. What I mean by that is some of the other layer ones out there from their inception focused on a use case. When you get introduced to a layer one in 2018, the next question is, what use case that you're building, right? Mm-hmm. And we intentionally recruited council members that crossed sectors. We didn't want just a bunch of banks or a bunch of tech giants or whatever. We wanted the council to represent the full range of use cases because we didn't know where those killer use cases were going to come from. We just couldn't predict it back in 2017. 2018. And now we do, right? At least we know what the next wave is going to be. And coincidentally, it's a wave in finance that is common to nearly all of our council members, right? All of our council members have some kind of finance related function. It could be treasury management. It could be HR. It could be, it could be a supply chain use case where you have to move money from account to account across 30 different countries. Well, that's finance, right? That's a finance function, but it's related to supply chain and logistics, et cetera, et cetera. So again, what we're doing as a project is narrowing the focus from being completely horizontal to now being more focused on finance related use cases. There are only a handful. We're moving up the stack. We just talked about the different stablecoin or the studios rather, and how they play a role in this. And we're going to move up the stack further, right? We're going to move up the stack further to solutions, point products that's at that intersection of finance across ESG, AI, and tokenization generally.
That's awesome.
I'll touch on one.
Oh, go ahead, Charles. Yeah.
Just to put it in real world perspective, from something a lot of people are probably working through right now, is you're probably going shopping. You may be going to, Target, Walmart, whatever it may be, swiping your credit card. Again, a payment processor is a prime example of this. They have something called DSO, which is days of sales outstanding. So you go swipe your credit card at Target today, they probably don't get actually paid on that from your bank through the processor, through the broker for 30 to 45 days. Now, Target, obviously, they need cash flow, they need capital. So their bank typically offers them, a line of credit based on their days of sales outstanding at a treasury rate plus 50 basis points, whatever that may be. Now, at the scale of Target and Walmart, that's somewhere between $400 to $500 million just in interest payments on that 30 to 45 day float. Now, if Target decides, you know what, let's just go bank to bank and issue a stable coin and settle this in 3 seconds, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say 20 minutes. They're automatically saving $500 million a year just by implementing a stable coin. And that's the kind of thing where, you talk about finance, it's in every part of our lives. It's from HR, it's from retail sales, consumer payments, it's everywhere. So, again, heavy on the finance. I know the Hashgraph team is really deep in building products. So going from studios to actual products to launch, same thing. This is another internet cycle. This is preventing me from having to set up my own mail exchange with an SMTP server 30 years ago. Now I just log in and get myself a Proton Mail email address. Like, that's what Hashgraph's moving into. So really excited about 2026, if you can't tell.
Yeah, no, I this is a total sidebar and it's not out there in the wild yet, but I told, we actually had the opportunity to interview Tata Communications, and I'm hoping that we can release that either, before the holiday or maybe after, but we will see. And similar kind of thing that I was hearing from Tata Communications, where it was like, there's all these processes kind of going on in the background that have a lot of things that we could add a lot of value into things. We could make processes quicker. We could save money. We can do X, Y, and Z, to the tune of kind of similar to what you were saying, Charles. But all right, I'm going to round robin here. We're going to get to everybody, but I kind of want to get the forward-looking statements here, because that's what I'm sure everybody that's watching this wants to hear anyway. Anyways, okay. As technologies like AI, blockchain, tokenization, national systems start converging, how do you see Hedera infrastructure powering a new generation of consumer-facing or enterprise-facing applications? What might that transition look like at scale? And then just kind of more broadly, how will Hedera technology shape our future world? Whoever wants to take it, I'll let everybody kind of go a couple minutes, and then we'll have to move on to the next panel. And I thank everybody for their time.
I can do mine in 30 seconds. So I'll just say that Hedera was structured from the very beginning to be the trusted, verifiable version of the internet. People are starting to realize it, adopt it, and that's what's exciting in 2026. And you'll start to see it at scale.
That is a great
30 seconds.
Go ahead,
Leemon,
I can do 30 seconds too.
30 seconds. You go.
His example is great about how this isn't just putting finance onto the ledger. This is transforming finance itself. And that's what we're going to see. The infrastructure itself of the world is going to be transformed. We're seeing it happening now. And this will, of course, affect the consumers, and they will even use it without knowing it. That's what's coming.
I think that we have to mention, it's not been mentioned so far, agent-to-agent payments, right? Agent-to-agent payments, when it's at scale, it's going to dwarf everything else that exists today. And it requires the infrastructure. It requires the ability to be doing micropayments. It requires what we have in Hedera, and Hedera is going to be a part of enabling that for the future.
Eric,
I'm gonna say I'm excited about the tech, but let me give you the definition of tech. The T stands for tokenization race. That's what we're gonna see next year. Everybody's gonna race to tokenization. The E stands for ecosystem, and I think that our ecosystem is really strong, really solid, has a long history, which is not the case for many others, and it's going to continue to grow, including the liquidity provision. The C is I hesitated on the C because I was taking note, right? But I'm going to go with cancer because the cancer is going to continue to grow. And the cancer is going to continue to deliver a lot of value to ourselves as a network, but also demonstrate that the business model that we've been referring to for the last hours now is the right model moving forward. And then the H is for you pick Hsphere, HBAR, whatever you want, Hashgraph, right? But that's where I'm excited about the tech.
and I know Mance, I know just briefly that I know that there's more ways to participate in Hedera Council, whether it be from a community standpoint or an enterprise or an institution standpoint that just came out a couple of months ago. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that, which I think is awesome as well. But yeah.
Yes, no, right. So Sham is leading that. He's going to ramp that up. I think that there are announcements that are coming and related to that work that he's been doing. It is going to make it possible for, I think of it as another layer of participation in the project by organizations that perhaps aren't as large as the organizations today are that are on the council, but also provide an enormous amount of value to the project. We want those organizations to be part of Hedera, and this is going to enable us to do that. And I don't want to steal Sham's thunder, so I'm going to probably leave it there, but it's something that everyone should be watching out for.
I think it's in alignment with what Eric said is it's good to be able to say yes every time. Kamal, we're going to close out with you here.
In my view, I do see the future in the convergence of all other emerging technologies, where Hedera is the underlying infrastructure and the enabler for the evolution of something that computer scientists call polyglot systems / polyglot platforms, where we have Hedera Hashgraph as the underlying infrastructure, but we will see implementations with other emerging technologies, be it AI, robotics, IoT, smart cities, and so on and so forth. Hedera Hashgraph brings an unbeatable USP, which is the governance, which brings trust, credibility. And in parallel, we have robust infrastructure and a top-tier platform that is addressing the needs for innovation, disruption, all the way up to addressing the needs of highly regulated institutions. In my view, in 2 words, I see that in the convergence with other emerging technologies, and Hedera Hashgraph is not only the trust layer of internet, but also the trust layer for all other emerging technologies.
I want to ask Kamal briefly, and then I will close with Leemon. I know that you guys recently launched the Hashgraph Venture Fund as well, so kudos to you guys in that regard. I think that we need to see more kind of the follow-on funding for some of these innovators that are building out more mature solutions. So I wanted to make sure we mentioned that as well.
Absolutely, we will absolutely, and there are actually a short list of targeted grantees that have delivered great work for the ecosystem, for the network, and the fund is dedicated and exclusive for those who are building on Hedera Hashgraph. And as I mentioned earlier on, is the continuation for our ecosystem development activities, where we tap into third-party investors and try to channel investments and capital into the ecosystem.
Awesome. Leemon, you get the final word here on this panel.
Right. For those who are listening, who are helping build that future, it's exciting to be working with you. And for those who aren't, get involved. This is an exciting future. Help make the future. Thank you.
Well, I think that sums it up perfectly. And Dr. Leemon Baird, Mance Harmon, Charles Adkins, Eric Piscini, and Kamal Yousefi, we have pretty much all of Hedera represented, the leaders that have been driving this network forward forever. And thank you so much, as Eric mentioned, to all of the other builders out there that aren't here today. We're going to transition into the next panel. I wish all of you up here today a happy holidays if you celebrate, and see you guys for the next interview.
Thank you. Happy
Yes,
holidays.
Happy holidays.
I had to unmute my mic there for a second. Well, welcome back. Here we go. Richard, it's nice to see you again, sir, but I'm super excited for this panel because we're going to be diving deep into the weeds of all things technical on Hedera, where we've been, where we're at right now, and I think more importantly, where we're going. We have Richard Bair with us. We have Carlos Matilla and Gaurang from Bonzo Finance. Carlos is from ioBuilders, and Richard is VP of Software Engineering. I'm going to hop right in, gents. I want to thank you guys all for your time today. But Richard, to kick things off, how would you describe the progress that Hedera made in 2025? And there's a big announcement that just came out, I think, yesterday. Well, we won't get into that yet. But Richard, you get to kick us off here. Thank you for joining.
All right. So thanks, Ryan. Glad to be here today. I mean, we've been working really hard throughout the year. I'm sure people have seen the developer, what do they call it? There were some metrics on, how many developers per ledger, and we have a huge amount of developer activity on Hedera. A lot of it has come across in three areas. We have performance. Like every year we're doing continual work on performance. Scalability, latency, bringing the latencies down. I think that the current mainnet latencies are around 3.5 seconds, which is really fast. It's almost 7 seconds under the SLA that we had, which was 10 seconds. So lots of work going on there. Features, batch transactions, scheduled transactions, being able to schedule them from inside a smart contract. So smart contracts can call smart contract, kind of call themselves, which is really interesting. And then just investments in EVM developers, trying to make the development experience a lot better for developers.
I got a cough there, but I think we're good. So, I mean, I think in simple terms, for people out there that might not be super in the weeds with some of the technical aspects, how do some of the changes and some of the updates that have occurred on the network over this past year, how do they make building on Hedera better? What new types of applications are kind of possible because of the things that have been kind of updated throughout the course of this year?
Yeah, I think, the previous panel talked a lot about the acceleration of asset tokenization or, verifiable compute and all these different use cases. And I always feel that our responsibility on the technical side is to make sure that the platform has the features, capabilities, performance, scalability, security that's necessary to support that. And when I talk to our engineers, even going back, 4 or 5 years ago, our message has always been, this is a global scale software. And when you're designing things for global scale, you're designing it at a completely different level than sort of normal application development, if you will. So when we look at things like, for example, we introduced zero cost Ethereum transactions. What does that mean? We had a problem. To run a relay, which is necessary for Ethereum developers to be able to use our network, it cost a lot of money. And we looked at that and we said, well, this is no good. If this continues to cost a lot of money, people are not going to adopt our platform. So we needed to come up with a solution. So we created a solution for that. So, what are we doing in practical terms? We're reducing the cost of interacting with our system. We're making it so that it's easier when people use normal development tools to be able to use Hedera. And that's important because, as they said in the previous panel, right, it's one thing to have technology, but what you need is a large group of people who are able to target your technology. When somebody wants to build an application, they're going to go find a service integrator. They're going to go find a development house to help them build their software solution. They need to be able to use Hedera in a meaningful way. And so all the work that we do on the to increase the Ethereum compatibility on the platform is really to make it easier for developers to be able to deploy stuff here. The new features that we have, they sort of open up entirely new use cases. There isn't a single network out there that has this ability to do scheduled transactions. And we added this so that if you are writing a smart contract, you can basically say, I want my contracts to call myself in the future, which is really interesting because it gives you the ability to have sort of a, let's say, a background process that just goes without having to have an external process that's continually calling into the ledger to execute transactions. And it gives you the ability to write new sort of applications where you're going to automatically invoke this contract on the first day of each month in order to do payroll or something like this. I mean, there's just all kinds of new capabilities that are exposed to people. And I think, overall, our vision there is to increase the amount of on-chain compute that you can do. So that when you write an application, you can decide how much of your business logic is on-chain and therefore, immutable, verifiable, transparent, and how much of it is off-chain. And so we just want to provide all those sorts of capabilities to people. The new hooks features that we're adding, it sort of accelerates that. It's basically a way for you to take our native APIs and execute arbitrary logic on chain. And that means that builders like Gaurang can develop and deploy their software without having to wait for us to build every feature in the world into the network, because we just sort of open it up. We just say, here's a place, insert whatever code you want, knock yourself out. And then our job is to make sure that we can execute that code as fast as possible.
I think it's really interesting. I want to get to Gaurang and Carlos here. When you think about hooks, and this is a sidebar, this is mainly me asking because I'm interested. First, I think it's really interesting how the Hedera ecosystem is architected, because you don't have to get everything. You can pick and choose what you want based on your use case, based on your platform, your product, whatever. But then when I understand hooks versus smart contracts, hooks enable you to essentially get if and statements of logic. Is that correct? So like if something happens, then this next thing can happen because that first thing happened. Is that like a really rudimentary way of understanding it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so like the first hook that we've delivered is one that allows you to do sort of conditional authorizations. So if somebody does a crypto transfer and they try to take money from your account, normally you have to sign that transaction, or you had to have a pre-transaction that authorized them. But hooks give you an extra way to do it. Basically what happens is when we do the crypto transfer, we go, ooh, do you have a hook on this? You do. Let me go execute that code. And that code could do anything, but it may do, for example, check a list to see, is the account that's trying to pull money on your authorized, something that you've previously authorized, or, is it your grandma or whoever, is it one of your kids and they have a certain budget that they can take every month and it replenishes in the new month or whatever. But we'll be able to extend this to all kinds of hooks. Like, for example, you want to submit a topic to HCS topic, and it'll be able to run some logic and say, well, only accounts that have certain properties are going to be able to, submit to this topic. Previously, we would have had to write all of that logic in Java on the thing ahead of time. And if you were building an application that needed it, you'd have to ask us for it. We'd have to write a HIP. We'd, wait a few months while we're working on the details, all that kind of stuff. With hooks, you'll be able to just write it. And you write it in Solidity. It's just a normal EVM program, basically. And it's a special EVM program in that it gets called by our normal event handling, but it is just normal EVM logic. So it's Turing complete, and you can do whatever you want with it.
So I want to make sure let's get to Gaurang and Carlos here as well and kind of open up the conversation. And thank you guys both. I don't think I've had either of you gentlemen on here. I know I've had Brady from Bonzo on a good amount of times. But from your guys' experience perspective, and Carlos, I know you guys are all instrumental. I know, Carlos, you're certainly from some of the studio aspects on Hedera. You guys have really contributed quite a bit. how do improvements on the network help businesses that are building on Hedera? Like, where do you guys see the uniqueness there? Where do you guys see the uniqueness in some of the work that you're doing, and why it makes sense to build on Hedera from a Bonzo standpoint or from an ioBuilders standpoint? Maybe just broad thoughts here as we kick off. And thank you guys both, because we've never had you on, or I've never had you on. So I'll start with Carlos.
Yeah, okay, thank you, and good to meet you as well, Ryan. So from our perspective at ioBuilders, so all the improvements on Hedera that have been made this year, I think are make it very, very easy for us to start playing with financial services use cases. So as you mentioned, a lot of the work we do is around building infrastructure for tokenizing assets and money. So we have been mainly doing this through our asset tokenization studio, the stablecoin studio, those other the open source toolkits that we have been developing on Hedera during the last years. So we basically help banks and other financial institutions to tokenize different forms of cash, such as stable coins, deposit tokens, eventually CBDCs, as well as financial instruments like bonds, equities, funds, and even loans. For all these kind of use cases, I think what really matters is the reliability, that you have predictable cost, the ability to operate at scale without surprises. So all of this, is under Hedera's consistency, and obviously the governance gives the institution really confidence that we can run all these systems or very complex financial infrastructures in production, and not just in pilots, which is what we have been to date, really in the sector. So we also, and then on the DeFi side, and then I think Gaurang, you are more specialist on that field. So we also see clear shift in DeFi teams as well. So many of them are now building closer to traditional finance. They're trying to get closer to those products, thinking about settlement, liquidity, risk management. So I think Hedera works well in that space, because it behaves more like more like a financial market infrastructure without knowing that that you're building on DLT. And I think overall, all the improvements that have been discussed during to now in this call, help a lot, because they allow the teams to really focus on the financial logic, on the compliance, and instead of really worrying about the underlying platform. So I think that's probably I would say that's the quote I see in terms of how we see these improvements helping the business building on Hedera. I can elaborate a little bit more later.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting where my head kind of always goes towards like how do we relay how important these technical implementations are to like where this space as a whole is going. And you look at some of the stuff with tokenization and where a lot of these kind of estimates lead us towards in 2030. And obviously compliance has to be literally at the core of all of it, or else it's not going to happen. But I look at like a platform like Bonzo and think about what that's going to look like in 2030, because I'm sure it's going to look wildly different than it does right now. But Gaurang, from your standpoint, how does all of the amazing stuff that all of these builders have put together to improve the network, how does it set Bonzo up for that 2030 whenever we really see what's about to happen in this space? And thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks. It's good to be here, Ryan, and nice to meet you finally. Brady has spoken a lot of good things about you. So yeah, let me answer your question in like two perspectives, like two aspects, right? So the first thing is what we have right now and what we have done in the past. And the second perspective is what's going to happen in the future, what's going to happen by 2030, or even like next year or 2027 even, right? So yeah, until now, what has happened is, so Hedera brought EVM equivalence. We forked Aave, we brought that on Hedera. So all these days, as a DeFi ecosystem, Hedera and Hashgraph, like the whole ecosystem and community, we have been playing catch up, right? So we've been trying to bring other things that were there on other networks, other ecosystems. We were trying to bring them on Hedera. When we brought them on Hedera, it has been fantastic, right? So when we launched Aave Fork, which is Bonzo Finance, it was great to launch that. It has been great to run that because it's so cheap on Hedera, right? So there are two aspects I would like to mention. One is the, gas fees are like fraction of that on Aave, right? So if you go on Aave right now, if you want to swap your debt or collateral, it could take you up to like $20 or $30. But on Hedera, it's a fraction of that cost. That's one. So it's very easy to, for people to do transactions for liquidation bots. So liquidation bots are like a very essential component of Bonzo. And people who want to run liquidation bots, it's very cheap, and not just cheap, it's deterministic for them. So they know how much money they're going to spend every day, every week, every month, and they can plan their resources in advance, right? So that's amazing. Second is the fair ordering of transactions. So when you order the transactions properly, when you're doing liquidations, you don't have to worry about MEV bots sniping your transactions and doing all those things. If your transactions are correct, they will get into the blockchain and they will get executed. So these things have been awesome until now on Hedera, right? Again, I'll come to this later, but I think right now as a builder, I have a problem, right? For running Bonzo Lend and running Bonzo Vaults, which is our new product. It's a fork of Beefy Finance. For running these two products, I'm running multiple cron jobs, and I think Richard knows where I'm going. And Richard can attest to this, how reliable cron jobs are, and how many times they keep failing, or you have some, you miss some blocks or something like that when listening to events. But with all the new features coming up, so currently we are exploring and working on scheduled transactions and batch operations. It will be ready next year, won't be ready right now. But I think those two things are going to help us immensely. And as you said, by 2030, Bonzo Finance will be completely different, right? So again, just to finish my thoughts. So until now, we have been playing catch up. We have been trying to do what was there on other networks. But now, from this point forward, with all the amazing things that the team at Hashgraph has done, we are going to lead the whole Web3 industry, because these things are not available anywhere, right? So I think we are going to leapfrog the entire ecosystem, and let's see how it works out.
I'm going to use that for a short form clip, Gaurang. We'll just say that Hedera is going to leapfrog everybody. So I want to ask, though, in the kind of vein of decentralization, Richard, obviously Hyro and LF Decentralized Trust, which was, I think that was 2023, late 2023, or no, that was 2024. But maturity in an ecosystem like Hyro, where the code base moved over, and LF Decentralized Trust, where essentially the first network to graduate under the Linux Foundation's lifecycle framework, I think in August. Strong governance there. Also Python, which is another kind of language that came to Hedera. Just touch base maybe briefly on like the status, because when you mentioned Hyro, for those that aren't aware what that is and some of the milestones within LF Decentralized Trust, Linux Foundation, as far as decentralization and where the network's going, what that opens up, I guess, more broadly speaking, for enterprises or builders, whoever they are, to actually start building.
Yeah, when you mention Linux, almost everybody in the world will have some idea of what that is. Certainly anybody who's in the tech space knows exactly what that is. But not everybody is as aware of that Linux is actually hosted by the Linux Foundation, which is one of the largest open source foundations in the world. And their purpose is to basically be a safe trust in which code can be donated and developed so that it's totally vendor neutral. It's going to be open source forever and ever. And when we had our Hedera code, which was open source, but it didn't have any kind of foundation, and we really wanted to make this so that everybody would be able to trust, because it's in our nature, right? The trust layer of the internet. We wanted everybody to be able to trust that this code was being developed properly in open source with open governance, vendor neutrality, and would be available forever. And so we donated the code to the Linux Foundation. And they needed a name for their project. And of course, they can't use the name Hedera because that's sort of, the public L1 name. So we created the name called Hyro, which is short for hieroglyphic. It's sort of the, hieroglyphic is two words. It's Hyro, which is sacred, and glyph, which is sort of a symbol. And so we chose the word Hyro. It kind of had a little cryptography angle to it. We thought it was kind of cool. So when we talk about Hyro, that's the project that governs the development of the source code. And that project has a technical steering committee. And that technical steering committee is responsible for reviewing every new feature that we're going to deploy into the system and make sure that we have community alignment around those changes. And the Hyro Technical Steering Committee was designed in a way that would require multiple independent characters from different companies to steer it. So Hashgraph has 2 people who sit on that. Any one company has 2 people who can sit on that steering committee. And so as a consequence, we have great community involvement, and we've filled out the rest of the technical steering committee. So it's all operating. The meetings are in the public. You can go join these meetings. And we've had many people from the community who join these meetings on a regular basis and actually contribute. And one of the areas that we've had a lot of adoption from the community is in the Python SDK. Most of the SDKs that we have been funded one way or another through Hashgraph and Hedera. But the Python SDK is completely organic, and it's been amazing to watch. They've had a tremendous uptake of new contributions. They have, I think yesterday I was looking at it, they had 80 independent contributors. And it is all organic, and it was really actually, for the rest of our projects, a sort of guiding light to say, this is how open source is done. And so we're trying to take the lessons that have been learned from that and apply it to all of our different projects. I've used the analogy before that, as an open source project, our door has always been open, or at least it's always been unlocked. But a lot of people didn't know that the lights were on, that there was food and catering inside, that you could just come on in and be part of the team, right? And that's on us. That's something that we're working on, is to make sure that everybody sees that we've got the lights on and the door is open and we're inviting and welcoming, because there are so many incredible things that people can work on. And if you're a new engineer, trying to find something to contribute to, these are fantastic opportunities. All that, stuff that Leemon was saying in the previous section. And what I tell our engineers, we have a legit shot at rebuilding the entire world's financial infrastructure. And that's an exciting thing to be working on. So Hyro is where that work happens, where we build the sort of underlying pieces, the SDKs, the mirror nodes, the block nodes, the consensus node code, all that stuff is happening there. And so we've had a lot of great progress in establishing ourselves inside Hyro. Midnight from Cardano, they joined the LFDT as well. So there's real momentum there on LFDT. Hopefully we'll see more of that as time goes on. I think it's really smart. L1s should be contributing to the LFDT. It's a good place for collaboration and for trust in the independence of the code.
For anybody that wants to, I recommend everybody go and look at members of LF Decentralized Trust, because they are some pretty big entities. I know DTCC is there, Hitachi is there. There's one other entity alongside Hedera that is in the premier kind of category there, and then there's tons underneath. I want to move to Carlos here and ask you, because I think most people are probably interested in how enterprise clients engage with the technology, and that's consistently kind of evolved, especially over the past 12 to 18 months. It seems like it's really, almost on the fast track. But what have you guys learned from ioBuilders' standpoint on the kinds of problems that enterprises or institutions are actually trying to solve? Why do you feel like Hedera is a good fit, or why is Hedera a good fit for that?
Yeah, no, good question. So, what became quite clear this year is that the banks and the large institutions with whom we are working, are not just trying to, tokenize everything just for the sake of innovation, and they're not doing it on one chain because that's what they have been mandated to do too. But they're actually, the real problem they're trying to solve is really how to move value and manage assets really more efficiently across our institutions, across trading venues, how they can mobilize and distribute assets more efficiently, more directly, and benefit from the native technology. Obviously, while staying fully compliant with the regulation, with giving comfort to the regulators as well, because all these projects that are run by institutions, at the end, when you play in a regulated environment, you need to present the technology. So what is infrastructure that is behind that you are running this, and you need to explain that to the regulators. And to be honest, and it's fantastic how Hedera has been perceived as the trusted layer that some institutions are choosing to do so. And you mentioned some examples in the previous group, but we have many more as well that we are starting to see, and that's gonna go public in 2026. So stay tuned, because we are very soon announcing quite a few good use cases on launch on Hedera that are quite relevant for the industry. But just to give you an example, on real problems. So, for example, when we work on tokenizing cash, whether it's a stablecoin, deposit token, CBDC, the goal is how we can make faster settlement, how we can have better liquidity management, how we can reduce operational complexity. When we work, for example, on tokenized securities like bonds or funds, the focus is on life cycle management, how we can get issuance, distribution, corporate actions, and settlement on chain. And there is also the need now today, this year, to solve privacy, and especially when transactions happen between institutional clients. So that is, for example, something that can now be solved through Hashgraph as well. So, which, by the way, we need to start now really communicating now much widely to our clients now that is live. So Hedera basically ends up, I think, being a good fit, because it acts as a neutral and trusted coordination layer between all the parties that are part of a market. So when you think about market infrastructure, you have banks, you have in-market intermediaries, like you mentioned, DTCC, custodians, and the regulators who need to see what happens in the market. So I think Hedera, I think solves all these problems, because you can build through the studios, all these life cycles, because you can get cash on chain, you can get those securities on chain, you can do native delivery versus payment. So I think that's the beauty of what of our playfield. So and also the governance model, and the long-term stability and the the council members behind the network, are especially important. So yeah, that's I think probably I would in summary what I would say about what the area where we play. But we're really really excited, and this year we are going to start seeing all these new announcements coming in from all the work that has been done on the technical side, but also on the go-to-market.
Well, hey, I'll raise my hand 10 times out of 10. When some of this stuff starts going live, Carlos, feel free to reach out. I would love to bring you back on. Gaurang, I want to ask you just briefly. I think it's always interesting for especially for a platform like Bonzo and for the work that you guys are doing there, to essentially build at scale based on where the network's at there now, and then again where it's kind of going. But what has your team done? I would love maybe just a brief kind of answer on what you guys have helped push, or some of the improvements you've shaped. And I guess it's under the context of this that I've come to realize that most people I interview in Hedera are a part of a platform, but when you peel back the layers, they're doing like 30 other things infrastructure wise on the network that they're like very important. So I would just love you just maybe briefly to touch base on that, Gaurang, and then we'll get into some bigger picture stuff.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, as you know, Bonzo has been running for more than a year now on the mainnet since October 2024. And we have thousands of users, and all of them have positions on Bonzo Lend. And with the new product, Bonzo Vaults, we will be adding and managing liquidity on Saucer Swap pools directly. So yeah, in terms of scaling, and what we do is we give them points every day on the HCS network. So people who have positions on Bonzo Lens and Bonzo Vault, all of them, they get points. So every day we are doing thousands of transactions on HCS through some of our wallets. And so I think as I mentioned earlier, some of the things like batch operations, hooks. So what Richard was mentioning with the hooks on HCS, I think that's going to be really important for us. And we are definitely going to be one of the active users of all these new features, awesome features that that the team at Hashgraph is building. And we will definitely help stress test those features, and we will break it. Richard and I, we have had so many conversations in the past. We have told them, hey, this is not working. And Richard always takes that feedback, and these guys just deliver all the time, right? So we will be the team who will stress test that, we will break it, and we'll make it better. Yeah.
I think everybody here kind of brought up an interesting point, and we'll ramp down here. I've got a couple of questions left for you guys. But as Richard mentioned, kind of the organic growth with Python on the network. For some context, like Python coding language is really big in like the financial services industry for like data scraping. It's really big in machine to machine learning, really big in AI. And I think what Richard was leading us down a path, and I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but Mance in the last panel talked about agent to agent payments, and you're mentioning like batch transactions. Then we get into fixed fees, and my head starts going towards a future where, you need predictability for where AI is going to take us from a financial standpoint, and you need provenance and all the other stuff that comes along with it. But Richard, do you have any thoughts just like on when you start combining different things about where AI is going? You have fixed fees, you have the ability to, batch transactions, you have these agentic or these agents that are going to be doing all sorts of things in the future. I've said this before. I think Hedera is uniquely suited for a lot of different things, but I think from through a sustainability lens and through an artificial intelligence end, it's very uniquely suited. Richard, I would love, this is more of just me wanting to ask this question briefly, if you could touch base on that, and then we'll ramp us down with these last two. You're muted.
And I got it. Yeah. No, I totally agree with everything that you were saying. I think that we're very well positioned to be a system that's used by AIs. I think that the fee structure is a huge part of that. I mean, it's always been the case to me that I always looked at it and said the fixed fee system on Hedera is one of the secret weapons of the system, because you don't have to worry about the price in real terms as the the token value floats relative to your fiat. You just don't have to worry about what that cost is for you. And for AIs that are going to be doing, just over time, it's just going to be like a huge flood of calls. Having them have the ability to be able to interact with the blockchain is going to be huge. I think that things like HCS will be very important for it, because it's a way to sort of communicate between different agents or collaborate between agents. Is a very interesting idea. And, we support that. Agents calling smart contracts will be something that happens. And agents that need finance is going to be important too. So, they're going to need to, if you buy into the notion of Web3, which is that the value is supposed to be derived at the edges of the network instead of captured by a central owner. So everything is decentralized and the value is at the edges of the network. And if different protocols have their own tokens for being able to fund development and support over time in order to stay relevant and continue to work, if you buy into that vision, then it's sort of a given that AIs are going to need some way of being able to do finance on chain. They're going to need to be able to buy and sell tokens. They're going to need to be able to do so. It's not just agents that are, say, acting as your stockbroker, but it's just agents in order to do their work. Let's say, for example, that I have an agent and I want my car to drive itself down to the car wash and get itself cleaned. How is it going to do this? It's going to need some payment system to do that. And maybe there are reward tokens that I get from my car wash. And maybe I want to use those reward tokens for something. My agent's going to need to be able to convert those reward tokens into something else. A whole system, a whole economy can be built on these techniques. So I think, and Leemon was saying this in the previous call as well, this idea that like everything in the world is going to be tokenized because it's just a more efficient way to do finance. And if you have robots doing your finance, in any of these things. They're handling my my airline points or whatever. Having all that stuff on chain, having all of the capabilities on chain for them to be able to do it, having fixed fees, having high performance, those things are all, I think, really, really important. And so I think, if you look down the line in terms of what you want the economy to look like, Hedera is really well situated because of the technical underpinnings and the governance underpinnings and the way that we pinned the token to essentially, the base stable coins of the world are all on USD. So we're all pinned to this USD as the basis for which we price our stuff, which I think was all really smart and puts us in a good position.
So I want to go ahead, Gaurang. Yep.
Yes, just a quick thing to add there. Ryan, you must have heard about X402, which is a payment standard for AI agents by Coinbase. And right now it's like mostly active on like Base and Solana. And I've been working with some, developer advocates on Hedera. We are also exploring some use cases for X402. But just want to mention that this kind of a standard, if it wants to work with micropayments on Hedera, Hedera is the perfect blockchain for that, right? Because if you want to do microtransactions for $0.1, $0.2, I don't know, something like that, then the transaction fees are very low on Hedera, and it is a really viable use case. On Ethereum, it's not possible, absolutely not possible. On Bitcoin, it's impossible, but on Hedera, it's definitely doable.
Yeah, imagine trying to predict fees. And nothing against Ethereum. I think Ethereum is great. I know that Hedera has spent a lot of time from all the builders on Hedera from an equivalency standpoint. But imagine trying to predict fees. All right, so let me move us into kind of a dual part closing question here, because I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. All of you guys are kind of uniquely suited, whether from kind of the convergence of DeFi and TradFi or enterprise adoption or protocol development. I would love if you guys could, number one, touch base on the strongest signs of maturity or momentum that you've seen in Hedera to date, or more recently this year. And then number two, what are the kind of key themes or key things that you're excited about moving into 2026? Why are people going to be flooding into Hedera next year? Whoever wants to take it first. Easy question. Why don't I start? I'll start with Carl.
I can take it. So I think one of the strongest probably signals of maturity is the type of projects that are now being built. Not really. We are seeing real financial markets initiative really going into production, not just proofs of concept. So I think just good example that is being launched on Hedera in Europe, which is a project we've been supporting along with the foundation, is OpenBrick. So OpenBrick is an infrastructure initiative backed by Six Group, by the Swiss, the main Swiss financial market infrastructure, and BME, the Spanish CSD, which is one of the most established financial market operators in Europe. So that shows, this kind of involvement shows that tokenization is really moving into the core of financial markets, so not really staying at the edges. And I think more broadly, what we are seeing is that institutions are really committing to long-term programs with clear governance, operational models, regulatory engagement. So not just short-term experiments just led by digital assets team. So we're actually talking about really institutions that are really putting budgets in this, that are going to start investing in this. And I think within the Hedera ecosystem, there is also much better alignment as well between technology teams and business stakeholders. So conversations are starting to be less about what is blockchain. Obviously, there are groups of people that need to deep dive on that, but there is really now not a question about why we are using this technology. So it's more about how we really integrate the assets, financial assets, and the cash into existing market processes. So to me, that's a very strong sign of real momentum. I think also on our side, I would like to also emphasize the fact that we are seeing two two kind of worlds working in parallel in the institutional adoption. The first on between TradFi entities only, so between institutional traditional clients that obviously will take more time, but they're, as I said, building long-term programs. But they're more looking at kind of the defensive moment, being more bringing the efficiencies into this world. And the second one, which is probably one of the most the most interesting at the moment, is really the bridge between TradFi and DeFi. So basically connecting TradFi issuers like asset managers with Web3 institutional investors like allocators who can really bring new liquidity and that they need to diversify into real world assets and get more stable returns and not just from crypto and DeFi. So that's I think probably one of my quotes and what I'm really excited for next year.
Awesome. Carlo or Gaurang, we'll go with you next.
Yes, absolutely. So from a DeFi ecosystem perspective, I think TVL, growth of TVL is one of the most important things for any network. And again, I would like to mention the Hedera Foundation. They've been doing amazing work in the background. So all the partnerships that they're doing, all the liquidity providers that they're building, all the bringing to the network, all the market makers they're bringing, it is amazing. And for example, we had the integration with Layer 0 and the Stargate bridge. That has enabled WEther and WBTC to be bridged on Hedera from Ethereum and other networks. What that enables is that this year and even next year, I think there's like millions of dollars in liquidity which can be tapped and brought onto the network. And I believe there are a lot of liquidity providers who are just waiting for the ecosystem to mature and all the products to fall into place. And so I think like all the pieces are there. It just needs to get kickstarted, and I think the network is going to grow definitely because all the teams are working in tandem and they are doing an amazing job. Definitely.
I often wonder if it's like I know obviously this year, and I think that it was said in the first panel too, the Genius Act opened a lot of doors, especially in the United States, and we're still kind of waiting on the Market Clarity Act, whatever the terminology is. And I often wonder if it's almost like, because it seems like enterprise and institutional adoption, it's like nobody wants to be first, but everybody wants to be second. And I wonder if it's like an iceberg that you can just like kind of barely see the tip above, and then just like there's all this stuff that we don't see. Anyways, I'm rambling. Richard, I would love if you could walk us out here. Strongest signs of maturity or momentum that we've seen kind of to date. Why are builders coming onto Hedera kind of next year? What are you excited about? And thank all you gentlemen for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I think for me, some of the signs of maturity of the ecosystem, the market as a whole, stablecoin adoption. There's been massive stablecoin news and adoption over the course of this year. Even Wyoming's Frontier stablecoin, which Hedera, among a few other ledgers, is chosen by them to mint their stablecoin on. I mean, it's just like, if you backed up 4 or 5 years, the idea that one of the states was going to be minting a stablecoin, it would seem absurd, right? But that's where we are. And I think that the Clarity Act had a huge impact on this, providing, the Clarity Act and the Genius Act, right? Providing that legal underpinning and clarity over, how stablecoins would fit. And then the Clarity Act which will do the same for, token economics and things of this nature. So I think those are really important. And I think seeing those things actually find their way through the U.S. legislative process has been very important in maturing the industry and opening doors. So everybody else is willing to get involved. We see all the different financial systems, JP Morgan or BlackRock or whoever, talking about stable coins and wanting to get involved in asset tokenization. I think those things are all big because this sort of legislation has come through. Then we have things like Equity Labs and their partnership and working with NVIDIA and Intel and Dell and these guys in order to, to create verifiable compute for AI. I think that's really important. Obviously, the AI wave is huge and it's not going to go away. It's going to be, our future. Our children, our grandchildren, they're going to live in a world of AIs, right? And these technologies will help make that a safe world for them to be in. So I think that one's important. We also saw some Hashsphere adoption, AP Plus down in Australia, has their HashSphere. And we also did a presentation at the Bank of England, which has been published. That was really an impressive affair. I had the opportunity to present at one of the sessions. They asked extremely good questions. They wanted to understand the basis of the Hashgraph algorithm itself. They weren't just at the high level, but they were going very deep and trying to understand these things. And Hedera was in the set of final presentations that were given there at the Bank of England. So that was really important. Also because, the Bank of England has been very crypto skeptic as well. And so to see them be exploring these things in an open way, they've published some new guidance on stablecoin. What's the word? I lost the word, but the collateral that banks hold relative to that, or individuals and so forth. They've been, coming around to all those things are really good signs of adoption and maturity. I think that going forward, the network of networks is going to be big. All these little hash spheres, and having a really good interledger protocol that allows us to move value from ledger to ledger is a big deal. How we move those, how we are able to facilitate the movement of value from ledger to ledger is going to be a critical part of how this world of multiple ledgers, spheres, and Hedera and other ledgers all interoperate with each other will be a big deal. And we see things like that. Just the other day, a Circle was acquiring, acquiring. I forget the bridge name. I was going to say Axelar. Yeah, it's Axelar. I think Axelar was it. But you see these sort of things. You can see this consolidation. I think this is going to happen in the industry, and so I think future. As far as the technical side is, we are focused on planet scale, billions of entities, increasing the number, the TPS rates, the amount of say gas per second that you can do with the EVM. We want to make that an order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude higher than it is today. Lots of work going on in these areas in order to be able to support the world building on top of Hedera and these hash spheres. Lots of adoption. Government, sanction, legal frameworks that everybody can operate under, banks and everybody getting really involved. Bank of England was a great example, and this has opened up a lot of other doors of conversations as well.
I want to ask just briefly, and so Circle acquired Interop Labs, which I think is Axelar, right? Isn't that Axelar?
I think it was developers.
And I know with Equity Lab and NVIDIA, what was really interesting to me was to see kind of the Accenture aspects, leveraging it for kind of public sector, which I thought was just really, really awesome. But as we kind of ramp down, I think yesterday or the day before, what was it, block nodes? Because I remember our interview that we did from late 2023, we were talking about block nodes. For people out there that are watching that might have seen that update, that I believe is starting to go live, beginning to go live in Q1 of next year, if I'm not mistaken, from reading about it. What is that in broad strokes? Because you mentioned network of networks. Is that kind of the beginning of, as the network grows and expands, it kind of becomes more decentralized, becomes more, builds itself up to an extent? I'm rambling. Richard, you could just
Block nodes are like a great opportunity for anybody to be able to run a node. And what they do is they're sort of the data store and dissemination system. So like the consensus nodes, they order the transactions, they execute the transactions, and then all together they sign, they create a block proof to say this is the outcome of our work. And then they ship those to block nodes. And then block nodes make those available to everybody else. And the two things that block nodes really give us, number one, low latency access to data. So when we're talking about financial markets and things like that, being able to get a raw stream of data coming out of consensus nodes, you'll be able to get the data just milliseconds from when the consensus nodes have handled the transaction. So it's a very low latency stream of data. That's really important. And the second thing it's going to do is, so we had a problem. The problem we years ago we created the mirror nodes, which are basically a big database that you can store all your transactions in. And we told people, we said, hey, you can run your own mirror node. You don't have to use the Hedera public mirror node. You can run your own. And that is a scalability solution because it allows the whole world to be able to scale. The problem is, in order to run a mirror node, you had to pay a lot of money because the mirror node had to go download this data. And there's like this request or pays thing from Amazon or Google, and you had to pay for access to all that data, and it was expensive. And so what block nodes are going to do is they're going to allow us to bring down the cost of operating your own mirror node. So you will be able to run a mirror node that just stores the data you care about. In fact, it would be possible for you to write the sort of application where you have a mobile app, and your mobile app is getting raw data from the block nodes, but only for the account that you care about. And it doesn't have to have any intermediaries, and it'll get a complete state proof to say, this data is your data, and here's the proof. You can build some very interesting systems that way. So block nodes, they solve a whole bunch of problems for us, but I would say an easy one to think about is low latency access to data and filtered access to data. So you get just the stuff that you really, really want.
Well, I certainly want to thank all of you guys, Richard, and let's do this again. I would hate to look and then a year and like a month from now we're doing our next interview, because there's so much cool stuff to talk about. Because I literally looked yesterday when Block Nodes went live. I'm like, when did I interview Richard about this? It was like literally a year ago.
Yeah.
So let's definitely do this again. Again, huge shout out to Richard Bair, VP of Software Engineering at Hashgraph. I want to give a gigantic shout out, and a first time I've met you, Gaurang. So we'll have to definitely do this again. Bonzo Finance's CTO, and same thing with Carlos. I think I might have had Carlos on before, but I'd like to do it again in the near future. You talked about how much really amazing things are about to kind of go live, hopefully in next year, and we'll see some really interesting stuff from ioBuilders. That being said, hang out with us here for a couple of minutes, everybody, and happy holidays to the whole panel we have up here. We're going to be doing our next panel, which is HEAT, Hedera Enterprise Adoption Team, and thank you guys.
All right,
Thanks so much. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome technical panel that we just had. Super excited for our next panel featuring leaders from the Hedera Enterprise Adoption Team. This is the group driving how global organizations are not only exploring and testing Hedera technology, but more importantly, launching proof of concepts, rapid deployments, and scaling for real-world adoption. The man, the myth, the legend is about to join us here, Rob Allen, head of Hedera Enterprise Adoption at Hashgraph. And we also have one of the oldest and kind of biggest council members, which is Magalu, and the head of the chair of the membership committee, which is Simon Olson, a longtime Hedera committee representative. And this is going to be a really, really exciting one. So super excited to hop in here. We just, again, heard from network leadership gentlemen and the technical team about Hedera's progress in 2025 and moving into 2026. From both of your vantage points, and feel free to give some intros as we hop off here. What did 2025 make clear from the shift that we're witnessing from small DLT experiments to real scalable production level adoption? And thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll start with Simon here. Thank you for joining.
Great, thank you. So thank you, Ryan. And so as Ryan mentioned, I am currently the Magalu's representative on the Hedera Council. I'm also currently the chair of Hedera's membership committee. I've been involved with Hedera in February. It will be 8 years. So we were one of the first companies to sign on to join the council, and I've been actively involved as Magalu's council representative ever since. So it's funny, it's ironic that the crypto market is having such difficulties right now, because in terms of adoption of DLT, I think we've never seen anything close to this. So 2 points that I would make. So I think historically, DLT technology, distributed ledger technology, always made sense. But I think the lack of regulatory clarity was holding things back. And now with the recent passage of the Genius Act, I think we're just seeing an explosion of companies completely redoing the payment rails using this new, using DLT technology. So I think we've never seen more activity in terms of real value accretive use cases than we're seeing now. And then if I could quickly, just to contextualize that, I think that historically, you know, new technologies are driven by killer applications or killer apps. So if you think about the adoption of the internet, it was driven by killer apps like email, web browsers, search engines, portals, things of that nature, right? So those applications were so successful that they drove the adoption of the underlying technology, which was the internet. So historically, when you look at distributed ledger technology, there's really, it seems to be really only 3 killer apps that have taken off, which is cryptocurrencies, DeFi, and NFTs. And so what I think we're seeing in the last, you know, let's say 6 to 12 months is really the emergence of new value accretive killer apps in the form of tokenization and in the form of payment rails / stable coins. So I think we've never been in a more exciting period than we are now. And I suspect that if this technology goes the same way as all the other technologies, that we're going to see a rapid proliferation of other killer apps emerging beyond these initial ones. Thanks.
100%. Yeah. Thank you, Simon, so much. Great insight. And Rob, would love to hear your thoughts. I mean, you're sitting in the driver's seat here of some of the world's largest organizations. What are you guys kind of looking at from this shift that we're watching from just kind of the experimental phase of DLT to maybe getting through our teenage years into some of the maturity of some of these real world deployments?
Yeah. Hi, Ryan. So for everyone who doesn't know me, I'm Rob Allen. I've also been in and around the Hedera ecosystem, not on the council like Simon, but working in various capacities with Hedera for 7 or 8 years. We've seen a lot of movement in that time. My new role as head of the Hedera Enterprise Adoption Team gives me a kind of fairly unique insight into not just the council projects, but also more widely enterprise. I've been an enterprise delivery guy specializing in payment systems and banking systems for more than 30 years. So I've been on that journey. I've seen all of the technologies and how difficult it is to adopt in regulated industries brand new technology. But we, as Simon says, we are now there. The only missing piece of that puzzle was the regulatory clarity that regulated institutions need in order to have the confidence to proceed. We've got a number of regulated entities on our council, and to be fair, they are the most progressively thinking of the council members, many of them. It's just moving from proof of concept into production is a chasm, for a regulated organization. Not so much for those that are not, but there's still a new kind of technology adoption process that needs to be gone through, and it's not about the technology. Normally, it's actually about how you convince the chief risk officer, how you get strategic alignment, how you get a business sponsor to back this problem to be solved over all the other ones that they're kind of tackling or dealing with. So, I'm tracking over 50 projects that the council have done or are doing over the last 4 years or so, and many of those, of course, are proofs of concept, because that's the phase we've been in the maturity cycle for this technology. But the difference, the game changer that Simon alluded to in the Genius Act and all of the other kind of regulatory frameworks that we're seeing across the world in Europe with MICA, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in UK, and elsewhere, is just giving those more progressive organizations that want that competitive edge, that need to kind of stay relevant, to move from proof of concept to production. And I'm delighted and honored to be in a position where I can help some of the world's biggest companies to actually take that leap. And we've got some great ideas, but maybe we'll come on to those in a minute.
Awesome. No, and I think it's a really valid point where we're heading, because even if you look at an organization like Simon's, you're talking 35 million customers, 30,000 employees, 1,400 stores. The scale is absolutely massive. So in this, these upgrades, updates, these trials need to be done over a number of years to make sure that not only is the risk appropriately managed, but there's real kind of impact, I would assume, as well. But I'm sure both of you gentlemen know more about than I do. But I guess, Simon, the question I have, and I know that these are personal opinions, and I should have prefaced at the beginning of this, not financial advice from any of us up here. I'm certainly not a financial advisor. How does operating at the scale of an organization like you operate at, Simon, and then I'll move to you too, Rob, because of all of the entities involved, how does it influence the way that these organizations are evaluating or applying technology like Hedera?
That's an awesome question. And as you said, this is not financial advice, and the opinions expressed herein are my own and not my company's. So thank you. It's funny, I used to work at Google, and I remember I was very frustrated at one point, and I was like, when are we going to launch this? Let's launch this. And someone on the team said to me, Simon, you need to understand, when Google puts something out there, it goes from 0 to tens of millions of users within 24 hours. So we can't just throw something. This is not a startup company. And they threw a bucket of cold water on me, and it woke me up, and they're right. So I think it's a good point. I think with a lot of these enterprises, they operate on such a huge scale that they really do need to be sort of cautious. And it's not like a startup. Historically, that's one of the reasons why startups can outperform larger, more successful, established companies, because they can, if they launch something and it breaks or there's problems with it, it's not a big deal. But if it's a big company, it actually is a big deal. So they have to be more cautious. So I definitely think that that's one phenomenon that you see. Rob, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. So I think what we need and what we've seen in terms of the council adoption and those production, the relatively small number of production projects that have kind of got to production, is that in this first phase of the maturity of this technology, it's hard for many of these council members who aren't necessarily technology companies to actually adopt base layer technology. And so they've done it, and those that have been successful have done it with partners. So you partnering with a more agile, more nimble organization that can move quicker and isn't kind of tied quite so much by the constraints of big corporate and enterprise technology delivery. So an example of that, a very early example of that, would have been DLA Piper with Toco, right? So you kind of create a little spin-off team or an innovation team that can focus and be laser focused, almost like a startup, right? So a startup within the wider organization. DLA Piper is one of the world's biggest legal firms. They're not necessarily tech first, right? You wouldn't imagine them to kind of have a massive technology team. But to have that group that kind of worked like a startup with a founding team, worked for that particular use case, and then we've seen others like Mondelez with SKUX, Aberdeen with Archax. That's an early adopter approach, right? You work with a team because your own kind of organization isn't necessarily thinking about core technology upgrades. You kind of partner, and that's entirely legitimate, and we'll continue to do that. The other way, of course, is building from the base up, and Hedera is actually fairly unique, in fact, entirely unique in many ways, of course, in the Web3 space. But it's a decentralized network, but in many ways it operates like a Web2 platform with APIs that you can build on top of, right? So you can actually build Web 2.5 solutions in a similar way. So it's fairly familiar, excuse me, to those businesses who are used to doing that. And we've seen some of those as well. What we haven't got, and what we're now focusing on, is that middle ground where you have product, where you have repeatable, reusable product that really leverages the underlying uniqueness of the Hedera system. And we've seen some of those develop over the years. So we've got the stablecoin studio, we've got the asset tokenization studio, we've had Guardian and all the sustainability work, and now we've got the AI studio. So those four main pillars have really and organically shown how Hedera can be uniquely used in the enterprise space and of course in the startup space. And so doing that and taking those four pillars and creating product that our council members, and by extension, their peers and competitors across the enterprise space will use, is entirely our focus area now. So we've still got the partners, and we've got a growing list of excellent partners with whom our council members can work. They can continue to build, should they want to, and HEAT will support that as a professional service with organizations like THG and with Hashgraph and others, a long list of SI partners that will help doing the build if that's necessary. And then we'll have product, things like corporate cash management and treasury management, things like that will support operations, back office operations across many enterprises. Things like that will integrate with their existing ERP systems and SAP, and of course we've got ServiceNow on the council as well. So all of those ecosystem integrations are now coming in place, which means that we're ready for that kind of next stage of enterprise adoption.
If I could just complement some of the things that Rob was saying. So again, I would point to the lack of regulatory clarity. So what kinds of organizations are Fortune 500 companies? Are they huge risk takers? What's the organizational behavior like in these large companies, right? So I think, again, with lacking the regulatory clarity, I think that was a big hurdle to overcome. And I think in a lot of organizations, distributed ledger technology, up until, again, I'd say the last 6 to 12 months, was really a nice to have and not a must have. Now, if you're in tokenization, if you're in anything involved with payments, it's absolutely a must to have. So I think that we've seen a sea change in that. And again, a lot of companies wanted to do things before, but they couldn't because of the lack of regulatory clarity. And now that we've got that regulatory clarity, I think we're seeing companies, tripping over themselves to try to implement stablecoins and other payment rails and other types of solutions using distributed ledger technology. And then I'll point to something else, which is crazy. At some point, I remember being like, man, AI is, come from nowhere and it's taken over, and it's really sucked the oxygen out of the room, right? But when you think about it, AI has been around for at least 60 years in some form or another, right? And so DLT is still very young. And so the AI, it seemed like, came out of nowhere and there was huge adoption. But again, they've been fighting this fight for 60 years or so. And DLT is still relatively young. And I think we were really just ahead of our time. But that said, as we pointed to in your first question, I think now we're really seeing value accretive use cases, killer apps emerging, and I think you're going to see lots of companies in a variety of sectors embracing the technology in a way that they've never had before. And again, because it's now become a must-have in order to become competitive and no longer a nice-to-have.
And if I can also say that sorry, Ryan, your questions are going to go by to the wall now. But the four pillars that I articulated aren't pillars in isolation, right? So that they are all interconnected. And this is actually where Hedera really excels. If you've got stable coins and digital money as one pillar and real world asset tokens in the other, you have to have a way to settle between the two, right? Digital money for digital asset. So we demonstrated that recently in the Australian Payments Plus Project Acacia project with the Reserve Bank of Australia, and demonstrated it very well with many partners from different sides of that trade. Then with AI, as Simon was saying, we've got this amazing new partnership between Equity Labs and Accenture that's being, on a kind of go-to-market together initiative, which then demonstrates how agentic commerce and agentic payments can also be integrated into regulated organizations and high risk environments. So agentic commerce requires micropayments, and micropayments on Hedera are, stable coins or deposit tokens will operate at the micro level. So that combination works as well. In the environmental space, we're moving towards green bonds and other forms of asset that will drive the flywheel of adoption for renewables and emission tracking and all those great use cases. So that's a real world asset token as well, which also needs to be settled with digital money. So all of these things are interrelated. And it's in the intersection, in the overlap between those, where we get real innovation. And like I said, I think Hedera and Hedera's partners and everyone building on Hedera can trust that layer on which they're building this next layer of capability, which is actually very sophisticated and ahead of the game across this entire space. So it's a very, very exciting time right now to be working within this ecosystem, because we've had all these kind of green lights from the regulators now that say, right, it's go time.
I've always thought, just as maybe a mini sidebar here, and there's I get really excited on these interviews because I could literally ramble forever, but I promise both you guys I won't do that. I think it's interesting to watch how all of the different kind of layers start converging between all of kind of the pillars that you mentioned, whether it's AI Studio or Stablecoin Studio, whatever it may be. And then you mentioned something that maybe some people don't know the acronym, but ERP in traditional industry and business is these enterprise resource planning systems where, supply chain talks to HR, talks to finance, talks to, and it's these big systems that have probably been around for a few decades. So when you think about adding value into traditional enterprise, you really do need comprehensive solutions that cross a lot of check marks off to be able to actually enact change. All right, I'm going to stop rambling here. One question I also kind of have, and maybe Simon, maybe I'll start with you here. I think Hedera is also unique, and Rob alluded to it. Hedera has brought together enterprises, universities, Web3 leaders across literally multiple verticals in the entire world. I guess the question that I have is, what are some lessons learned that different council members may learn from each other for some proof of concepts, or that you gentlemen are just kind of learning over the years of doing this as well? Because I think that we could probably fill an hour with just that, but let's maybe keep it to a couple minutes. And Simon, we'll start with you.
Great. So first, Ryan, you pointed to one of the key reasons for actually joining the Hedera Council. So for those who don't know, Hedera has a unique governance system, which is that it's governed by a council of 39 of the world's leading organizations. And the rationale, at least from Magalu's perspective, was, hey, we want to join this council. This is an emerging technology, and we want to have optionality. So we want to be able to see what all the other world's leading organizations, what they're doing in their industries with this technology. So it's a way to get a view of, what, again, people in different industries are doing with it. And then, you can learn from them. And so that was why the impetus for Magalu initially joining the council. But the second reason for joining the council is really these, we say in Portuguese, aprendizagens, which means learnings. So by watching the other companies, we can learn what works and what doesn't work. So I'll give you a great example. Let's say the way that it normally works is that there's some net promoter, some courageous individual within one of these organizations who's got vision and courage and says, you know what, this technology is going to be really important and we need to do something with it. So let's say that person is in the CFO's office. If you're going to do a use case, you should try to do something that's related to the CFO's office. If that person were from the marketing team, then they should try to do something that's related to marketing. Because the more you try to do these cross-company initiatives, you lack the political power to get it done within these large organizations. So now, thankfully, things are changing slightly because, again, it's gone from being a nice to have to a must have. So this is absolutely mission critical for anyone, for example, who's doing anything with payments. They need to use DOT technology now. But that wasn't traditionally the case. And so people would come with these elaborate, awesome use cases. And so I'll give you an example. Let's say Magalu was doing a customer loyalty points or tokens or something like that, okay? Guess what? When you implement them, what do you have to, it makes a ton of sense, okay? Customers in Brazil don't do reviews. So we're going to motivate our, 40 million customers or whatever it is by giving tokens as rewards for reviews. Okay, that makes sense. But guess what? When they're spending those tokens, we need to change the payment rails, online and in the site and in the mobile app in order to accept those tokens. And guess what? We need to change the layout of every single, product to incorporate those tokens. And so the more you involve other teams across an organization, the harder it is to get that done. So what my advice would be to other council members or people who are doing this, regardless of what platform you're working on, I think when you're trying to do these initial use cases, try to do something that's within your control or within the, your sphere of influence. Because again, the more pieces across the company that you require, the harder it is to actually get it across the finish line. So that's what I would say.
I think I've heard the saying you can try to be the master of one thing or the master of nothing before, and I think that's pretty interesting. Rob, maybe I'll take a little bit of a different, and if you had anything on that, please feel free. But I wanted to kind of ask, because you talk about all these pillars, and we certainly have all of these products that I think would allow for more rapid deployment of some solutions or some testing of Hedera technology, which I think is so important. I remember doing an interview, and I can't remember if it was some other players within Hedera, like PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, or Boston. Some of these professional services firms have said that it's very important to be able to rapidly deploy. And we're getting to a point in Hedera with the technology that some of these solutions that have been deployed out there, so AI Studio, Stablecoin Studio, are really making it a lot easier for enterprises to come in and rapidly do some different stuff. Is that kind of the case, or can you maybe explain what you're seeing there?
Well, yes. I mean, there's a few things to unpack there. You mentioned PwC. We've got partnerships now with, to my knowledge, 3 of the big 4, so PwC, Deloitte, and KPMG, in different areas. That's, in KPMG, India, the Hashgraph Association has been working very closely with to drive adoption in that in the subcontinent there. We've got PwC and Deloitte both working on sustainability use cases using Guardian. I mentioned Accenture earlier, that's working with Equity Labs on the go-to-market with for AI. So I think for Hedera as a technology provider, Hedera is many things, of course, but if you imagine it as a technology provider and technology platform, you need those go-to-market partners. And if you're focused around enterprise, then some of the biggest consulting companies in the world need to be your partners because they have all the clients, right? We don't have business development teams by the 100 in order to go to market, or 1,000, like an IBM, for example. But we do have an IBM on the council, so and we do partner with Accenture and PwC. So the partner model is really, really important for adoption, and we recognize that, and that's why it's being built out. Another thing, just going back to your previous question that Simon was talking about, I mean, I've been the chair of our Network Utilization Committee, or UseCon, and that is the venue for all council members to actually come and share their notes, share their experiences. We look at best practice. We look at the architectures that work and those that don't, and maybe share those experiences and those learnings as well in that forum. So that's a very unique thing, for within any industry to exist. We have standards organizations where these sorts of things happen, but actually real world experience shared between the likes of I don't know, just examples, Mondelez and Standard Bank and Arrow and Magalu and Google Cloud. Where would you get those organizations coming together and discussing adoption of brand new emerging technology on a regular basis, on a monthly basis? And in addition to that, influencing the priority of things like ecosystem integrations. What on-ramps and off-ramps do they need? What wallet infrastructure do they need? Where is the liquidity coming from? So all of that helps Hedera prioritize and the foundation that's particularly involved in this, going to get those integrations into the Web3 space, because we cannot exist as an island. We cannot live within a walled garden, because experience shows that you wither and die when you're kind of in a walled garden. You need interoperability. You need these integrations. So that's another reason for getting the weight of the council behind the work of the ecosystem partners, such as the foundation. So hopefully that answers your question. I'm sure there was something else in there that I've...
No, I feel, no, it definitely does. And I think Simon brought up a really interesting point. And the technology and the deployment of it is not becoming this would be really nice to have, but it's becoming almost a necessity. And I think you can probably look across certain verticals and see that maybe even more so than others. And, what sticks out to me is like, how do we validate truth and authenticity moving into, the next decade or so, which is where I think something like the AI Studio and Guardian, even from a sustainability standpoint, will play in. So the question I kind of want to ask here is, Hedera positions itself, or is becoming, kind of this clear role as kind of the trust layer of the digital economy, with all of the architecture that's kind of been rolled out in the industries represented on the council. Where does trust matter most, and where do some of the services on Hedera provide meaningful advantages across different verticals on the council? And maybe I'll start with Simon. And I think, how do you see that evolving? Because as you mentioned, it's becoming more than just this would be nice to do.
It's funny. I'll give you an answer. I'm not sure it's the direction you were headed in, but I'll share something that I think is fascinating, which is heretofore we've been hindered by organizational behavior. In other words, people at these Fortune 500 companies are slow to adopt new technologies typically because they don't want to take a career risk. But let me tell you an interesting observation about the collateral effect of Hedera's council structure. Hedera's council is made up by who? All of these, some of the world's leading organizations, right? So if you're an executive at a Fortune 500 company and you're interested in doing something with distributed ledger technology, which company do you feel secure suggesting to your leadership team? The answer is Hedera. And the reason is it's that old adage, no one ever got fired for hiring IBM. So due to the signaling value of the amazing companies on our council, I think from an organizational behavior standpoint, executives who realize that their companies now need to adopt DLT are flocking to Hedera because they feel like this is one of the safest bets, one of the safest paths. And I think they're right. And beyond just the point about the council members, it's also the fact that Hedera has historically had one of the most stringent sort of compliance and AML, see whatever, anti-money laundering, know your customer, and all those other behaviors. It was, unlike other platforms, it was never sanctioned by the SEC. It was never ruled a security. So Hedera historically has been extremely conservative, extremely risk averse. And so I think there is an alignment there, which I think will lead to lots of adoption. So not sure that's the direction you wanted me to go in, but that's something that occurred when I heard your question.
No, and I think it's, it's almost like nobody wants to be first, but everybody wants to be second, but with a lot more oomph behind it, because there's a lot of entities there. Rob, I didn't know if you had anything to add on to that one, and if not, I can move us forward here.
Yeah, no, I just want to echo what Simon said. I've been working in the wider Web3 space for over 10 years, and I was at PwC, and in the early days, it was very, very hard to even start those conversations. Working with banks, working with central banks, working with the top end of town. 10 years ago, blockchain equated to Bitcoin, and even 2 or 3 years ago, there are industries where that is still the prevalent view, and it's very easy for the chief risk officer to say no. Right? They usually have the final say, or one of the says in terms of signing off these new technologies. That has completely changed now, and it has always been an easier conversation, but it's a far easier conversation to have with central banks, as I do quite a lot, and through this experience with the Reserve Bank of Australia this year and Australian Payments Plus, I have these conversations all the time. The reason that Hedera was adopted as a platform for a central bank digital currency to be issued onto was because the Reserve Bank of Australia was comfortable and confident in that trust layer that the council provided. I mean, it trusted the technology as well, but that the door opener was that. The fact that we've been recently briefing the Bank of England and the Bank of International Settlements and have some amazing reusable collateral that can then be, played back to other central banks and financial services, ecosystem participants, just all accretes more and more trust, more and more value in our ability to have these discussions, to the point where it almost goes away. The trust question is answered. Now what? Now what can you do with us? And that's where we are. People like Greg Bell and the foundation are having these conversations all the time in Wall Street and the similar areas globally. We don't have to answer that question anymore. Trust, is kind of imbued in these great organizations. And the fact that by design the council, is cross-sector, because you wouldn't expect these different organizations to collude against the network, and that's the definition of trust. This is why decentralization required trust, right? Or trust requires decentralization rather. And in most networks, it doesn't actually exist, because you look under the covers and you see mass pools actually providing the hash power or the staking power for that network. You see compromises being taken in order to move to a layer 2 or whatever. We don't have any of those problems. We don't have the problems with front running or MEV because of the Hashgraph technology. All these things actually make these conversations with central banks or regulated entities a lot easier.
Rob, can I ask you a question really quick? So you've been working with payments for 20, 30 years. Sorry, I don't want to date you, but 20, 30 years. It seems like within the last, let's say 9 months or so, we've gone from regulated financial institutions using DLT due to the regulatory uncertainty was, basically viewed as irresponsible. And now, with that regulatory clarity, not using DLTs, if you're a financial institution, have payment rails, if you were not to use it, it would be irresponsible. Is that a fair way?
Yeah, absolutely. But we don't even have to talk about DLT. You know, no one really talks about using the internet or having a database. It's what's the capability, and the killer app for this year and for many years hence is stablecoins, right? It really, I would say that as a payments guy, but I honestly think the lowest of low-hanging fruit now is adoption of stablecoins. Last year, probably issuing, right? So now we've got into the difference between the issuers of stablecoins, so something that like the stablecoin studio can support, so management and issuing of these new forms of digital money. But with Genius Act and the similar ones around the world, this is about adoption. You know, if you're any business in the world, certainly any enterprise in the world, must have a stablecoin strategy now. So when a proportion or a segment of your customers start to want to pay you in digital money because it's easy for them and safe for them to now acquire and hold stablecoins, what are you going to do? You have to make a decision, right? This is to your point, Simon. It's no longer something you can hide from or choose not to make a decision. You have to decide, are you going to participate in this new economy, this new digital economy, or not? What is the risk of the not answer? You know, if you can't take stable coins in a year's time, what does that mean to your business? You know, how is your strategy going to adapt to, you know, new forms of payment, and what is your state of readiness for that, and what is the risk, potentially existential to many businesses, of not doing that? So I think it's actually negligent not to be focusing on that as a business right now. And one of the things that I did at the recent Hedera Council meeting in London was started that ball rolling. Heat is many things, but it can be seen as a professional services business for and on behalf of the council. And so, you know, the onus is now on me to convince as many of those council members as possible to prepare themselves for stablecoin adoption. And, you know, I've produced a playbook, which is kind of largely non-technical, but will enable us to, for every single council member, run through a sequence of phases where they can get adopted. And like Simon was saying earlier, we don't necessarily have technologists or even financiers or treasury people on the council, right? We've got a very different group of or varied group of council member representatives. So each one of them has needs support internally to educate and access the decision makers that are needed for something as significant as this. And we're going to help them with that as well. We're setting up a client advisory board. We're supporting them with their own internal executive engagement with the materials that they need to do that, to be the champions internally, to be able to achieve this outcome. And that's the first hook, right? That's the first initial stage. What are you going to do about, you know, adopting digital money? How can we help you? Because we've got all of these tools, and we've got the best and most trusted decentralized network on the planet on which you can do all these things. And by the way, it's the cheapest and most low cost and predictable network with the lowest environmental impact and the most secure through asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerant consensus. All of these things kind of add to that argument. But first and foremost, commercially, what are you going to do and how can we help you? And I think that is opening doors. I've seen at least over a dozen of our council members since London 2 weeks ago have come to me and said, right, let's go. Help. What can you do to help us? And I think that snowball will just roll and grow bigger over the coming months.
Well, I remember back a handful of years ago, and you mentioned how long some of the trust, how long certain layers of the trust took to establish, and you said the trust has been established. So it might move from trust layer of the digital economy to operational layer of the digital economy. But I want to ask you because, and Simon, maybe this is more suited for you. There are more ways for different organizations out there to get involved with Hedera, whereas maybe they're not sitting on the council itself, but now, you know, there's a partnership program, and it's almost like opening up, you know, for, you know, some of the masses here. Can you maybe just briefly touch base on that?
Sure. So historically, we had a sort of a sacred responsibility, which MEMCOM was, you know, in charge of, which was we wanted to get to Leemon's original vision, which was to have a council of 39 of the world's leading organizations governing the network. And basically, what MEMCOM is responsible for is to talk to the applicants and go through their applications and essentially recommend to the council which companies should join the council and which, you know, shouldn't. And it was an absolutely cruel position to be in. And the reason why is it was a zero-sum game. The decision was binary. Either you're all in and you can join the council or nothing. Does that make sense if you're trying to launch a new technology and get to critical mass? No, because you're leaving, you know, 95% of companies on the cutting room floor, so to speak, right? So basically, historically, that's bothered us since the very beginning. And we say there must be something we can do to incorporate these other people who are, you know, brilliant startups that are growing very quickly, that are executing really well, but who just don't fit the requirements of, you know, the large world's leading organizations that we were looking for. So this was a known issue. This was something we wanted to work on and fix from the beginning, and we finally gotten around to it. Sham, who has joined us from IBM, is in charge of this new initiative, and basically it's designed to incorporate these other leading companies who, you know, are very close to being qualified for the council, but, you know, maybe they don't have you know, large enough revenues or what have you. Maybe they're in an earlier stage of their journey. And so again, we'd like to get to critical mass. We think it's absolutely essential that we do so. And so that's what this is designed to help us do.
I almost got through a whole podcast with not messing up on unmuting my mic, but here we are. No, thank you so much, Simon. That's an awesome explanation. And I think it's interesting, and it's kind of a testament to what both of you gentlemen have been saying this whole time, is that this isn't really an option anymore, you know, whether entities are going to implement distributed ledger tech or not. It's kind of almost necessary at this point, and there's a lot of opportunity to onboard more companies out there. So I kind of want to lead us out here with both of you gentlemen, and as you look towards 2026, I've said this before in some of my videos and some of these interviews. It seems like on a daily basis, it's almost impossible to stay abreast of what's going on. There's almost a dozen things that come out that a handful of years ago would have been unheard of in this space and probably would have driven the news for 6 months to a year. How do you guys stay sane in that environment, I guess, is the first question. And then what are you guys both looking forward to in the next year? Whoever wants to take it first.
Let me go first then. I'm permanently excited about the prospects for Hedera, as anyone who's ever listened to me is probably bored with hearing. But I think 2026 is going to be significant. We've got a lot of really interesting projects on the council that are, you know, ready for prime time. Heat is going to help move from proof of concept to production on some of the ones that hadn't got out of that stage previously. I'm very excited about this new initiative to build up the stack and create more, you know, product and we're actively working on what that will be next year. So, and we've got to move quickly, right? So a year is a very long time in the Web3 space. So, there are many initiatives moving forward. This intersection and the rapidity of the AI revolution and the sorts of things that we can do on Hedera with agentic commerce and agentic payments, I think are going to be significant, and we don't really fully understand quite how significant they are going to be. But this is going to be embedded in every business everywhere, I suspect. So I think we're in a prime position for that. I won't talk to the 4 pillars again, but I think we will see a lot more new capability growing around that. And from a personal perspective, I've got a stretch target for the next 12 months to bring at least half of the council into new capability on mainnet, generating TPS, but not just TPS. We kind of now very much focused on value. Where is the value being created? Not only for Hedera, for the Hedera ecosystem, but also for these massive businesses, because they're very commercially focused, right? So the creation of value is the sole purpose of all of these things, and I think that will lead us to use cases which previously had been just innovation lab, experimentation, and nice to haves. The things that we're going to have this time next year will going to be must haves, and they're going to be driving a lot of adoption of Hedera.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you think about all of the amazing work that's been going on through AI on Hedera. So a huge shout out to all the teams that are involved with that. And what better network as far as fixed fees are concerned? I mean, if you're going to have agentic payments and things like that, you would expect to know like to be able to know how to plan these things, or to let the AI plan these things.
Yeah. Not only that, but the unit cost of payment is so small that micropayments was why I came into the Hedera space in the first place. Looking for something where you can stream value for streamed content. That was my kind of initial thinking, and while not compromising on the security of the system. And now we've got an agentic future where these delegated bots that represent me or someone else are going to have this authority to make payments. I've got to be able to set thresholds, but also trust that it's going to happen in the way that it needs to happen. All of those things we can build on Hedera, and are building on Hedera very, very safely. So yeah, I think that's really going to be this next phase, and the escalation we're going to see within the Hedera ecosystem.
Simon, I'm going to ask you the same question. What are you excited about for the future? And yeah,
Great.
thank you so much for joining, both of you guys, today.
Thanks. So what I would say I think people tend to think of consumer-facing applications, but as Ra alluded to, I think a lot of things under the hood, like these agentic agents, are really exciting. And I would also point to corporate treasuries. So corporate treasuries, particularly at these Fortune 500 companies, spend enormous amounts of money on fees to banks. And I think using stable coins, they can radically reduce those their costs, saving them potentially hundreds of millions of dollars over a few years, if not more. So I think we're going to see lots of really fascinating applications of the technology that we haven't thought of yet. And even one that maybe not too many people are talking about, but their company Figure, the mortgage company, which went public in September, I think is another perfect example of the value of doing something on-chain, in their case, mortgages, which was heretofore impossible using the old system that we had. I think they've taken the ability to grant a mortgage from 45 days to 3 days or something like that. And so I think it's funny to end the podcast like this, but going back to the way we opened it, I think we're going to be seeing a proliferation of new applications, killer apps using distributed ledger technology and using hopefully Hedera.
I love how you mentioned under the hood as well, because I think it's such a valuable thing where, you know, I think we're getting to the point where the technology is going to get so good, and it's going to get so good. And a lot of it's already kind of there on Hedera. I know with all these different pillars, as Rob has mentioned, that you're not even going to know that you're using distributed ledger. Things are just going to be quicker, cheaper, or whatever you end up doing. Well, I definitely wanted to thank you, Rob, head of the Hedera Enterprise Adoption Team, and all the amazing work that you're doing now and that you're going to be doing moving into next year, and Simon, chair of the Hedera Membership Committee as well. I want to wish both of you gentlemen a happy holiday as well, if you celebrate. And thank you guys so much for joining.
Absolute
Thanks for
pleasure.
having us. It's been a pleasure. Yep.
Well, here we are. This is a marathon, and this is super exciting. And I think what better way to close this out with Ed Marquez, obviously leading developer relations for the entire Hedera ecosystem. Ed, before we kick off here, I want to once again recommend that both OGs within the Hedera community and new entrants, or if you're watching this video for the first time and you're seeing Hedera, there's a Hedera community survey. You'll see the QR code pop up intermittently throughout this with Ed and I here. And make sure you guys go in, put your inputs in. Everybody, all individuals, all entities within the Hedera ecosystem are committed to continuously strengthening the ecosystem and strengthening the experience of the community. That being said, Ed, I would love if you could maybe, let's kick off here. I mean, you guys from the developer standpoint have had an amazing year. There have been, I think, 2 out of 3 parts of the hackathon, or maybe all 3 at this point. But what has been the experience like? What are some of the milestones? And yeah, what better way to close this out besides talking about kind of the builders here?
Absolutely. Ryan, it's a pleasure to be here. I've been following this whole session. Like you said, it's been a marathon, but insane and incredible value all throughout. And so before I even get into the hackathons, I mean, this session has been such an amazing recap, and, you know, it highlights how 2025 has been a fantastic year for the Hedera ecosystem. You know, I think there was a good compilation of all those amazing accomplishments throughout the year in key areas. So I love how leadership, you know, they got into the perspectives that they see on the day-to-day. I think we got to see how much these people care about the industry, about the ecosystem. And we also got to see, you know, how they think about the macro landscape, how they think about the drivers of Web3, and also the importance of mature and stable governance, which is the case here on Hedera. I think the technical session with Richard and Bonzo and ioBuilders, that was an absolute highlight as well, because that's very close to my day-to-day, right? Seeing the technical innovations that engineering, product, the community, and contributors deliver with this technology. And so from the EVM compatibility journey that Hedera has been on, from the network scaling, you know, and performance improvements, all those key features that Richard mentioned, that was really enjoyable, right? Because I think those are differentiators that developers and decision makers look at when they're evaluating what ecosystem to build on and what technology to build with. And of course, it's not just about technology, right? It's about the governance that we mentioned before, also about the ecosystem and the developer tools. And so I think many folks throughout the call have mentioned the developer tools, like the studios for tokenization, for stablecoins, for AI, for sustainability, the SDKs for agentic development, and also even the playgrounds to help onboarding. And so I think Hedera offers incredible technology, incredible tools. And then what an amazing segment by Rob and Simon covering everything that relates to enterprise. And I think this has been a particularly strong year for Hedera on enterprise. We've seen Equity Lab working with NVIDIA to bring verifiable compute in AI, right? Also massive strides on tokenization with all the work that Arcax and others are doing, tokenizing money market funds, investment funds, with the folks like Fidelity and many others. And of course, everything that's happening in sustainability. So we've seen Hyundai continuing to use Hedera and the Guardian to track those carbon assets throughout their life cycle, even Vera integrating with the Guardian as the largest policy registry. So all throughout, I mean, what an amazing year and what an amazing recap this session has been. So, you know, I can always get into hackathons, but want to pause there and see if you've had a similar take on your streams.
I mean, I will tell you from an interview standpoint, and I'm sure people are aware, like outside of the Genfinity stuff, just, you know, some of the deep divey stuff and personal videos and everything, it is almost impossible to keep up with. There's just so much going on. I literally cannot think of a favorite interview or a favorite piece of content or favorite announcement, because they're all amazing. I mean, recently had the opportunity to sit down with Wes Geisenberger, and it sticks out because it's recent. He was just at COP 30, I think. It was either 29 or 30. I think it was COP 30. And literally there's like nations talking about how can we leverage Hedera to solve for sustainability. And I think we can take things away from what everybody says, because everybody is doing something a little bit different at this point, because the ecosystem's just grown so big. Where, you know, you mentioned the prior panel with Simon and Rob. Both of them said we are at the point where DLT isn't just going to be a, hey, this is nice to have. It's going to almost be a, you need to have this to continue. And I think when you think about through the sustainability lens or AI or all of the other different things going on, I mean, my head goes in 1,000 places. You can imagine how kind of weird it is for me, like full circle moment, to see, you know, Accenture with NVIDIA and Equity Lab and public sector things being leveraged for AI. And before I even started Genfinity, and I was just randomly deep diving blockchain, I was like deep diving Accenture in 2019 and 2020. So hopefully maybe one day we'll interview them. But yeah, man, it's been crazy. I mean, you guys have been killing it. Everybody across the entire ecosystem is killing it. There's probably way too many people to mention, but I think one of the things that I'm interested in is like what's going to be built for the future. And I know we could get into the weeds with hackathons and everything, but really I think rapid deployment of the technology is so important. Being able to not go in to building on Hedera with having like some sort of crazy deep technical background. It's almost ironic because you have to have a crazy amount of technical skill to build solutions like Tokenization Studio and Stablecoin Studio and the AI aspects. But those people that have those technical backgrounds are enabling people that don't have those technical backgrounds to leverage the technology. So I think that's awesome. But dude, you're going to get me rambling.
No, I think I love that point. And there's one thing that I do want to highlight about Hedera on that point about tooling and different layers of the stack for different levels of, you know, expertise and skills. And the great thing about Hedera is that if you have those in-house development teams that already know Web3, Hedera is CVM compatible, and you can use those existing frameworks and tools and all of that, right? However, what our intelligent governance realized early on is that if we want to bring the traditional and existing world that has built many existing solutions and frameworks based on Java, languages like JavaScript or even Python, we need SDKs that those enterprises, those institutions, you know, can build or can leverage with the talents and teams that they have in-house to build their solutions that are blockchain enabled and Web3 enabled. And so that's an excellent foundation that you see in Hedera, where you have the EVM tools and frameworks available. But if you're familiar with Java, JavaScript, Go, Python, Rust, C++, or Swift, languages that you already know, you can also build very easily and accelerate your adoption. But that's not enough, right? There's those additional things on top of the SDKs, like those accelerators that you're mentioning, or those studios that accelerate your adoption and your, you know, proof of concept time, or even your, you know, initial deployment to production deployment. It accelerates it from days or even weeks compared to like months or, you know, quarters, which is the time that it could take if you're working with a system integrator that perhaps is not guiding you in the right direction, or if you're trying to build that expertise in-house. So developer tooling is critical when it comes to the successful adoption of this technology, and Hedera provides world-class tooling.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, you know, it comes down to just meeting users where they're at, whether it's normal everyday people or enterprises or literally whatever it may be, because I think we did hear a lot today of kind of where we're at right now and where we're heading in the immediate future. we're at the point where essentially everybody's going to be using distributed ledger in the future. I think it's a given. Everybody kind of knows that at this point in time. But what I think you really need to be able to do that is meet these users where they're at. Even as Rob mentioned, look at Hedera Enterprise Adoption Team as kind of a professional services network. So you get that little bit of a comfort level at the enterprise or institutional level. And then you're getting the tooling that's enabling people to just build applications that everyday people will use, because at the end of the day, the space is still so early. 95% of the populace isn't here. 99% isn't using this technology every day, but they will be. And those 99% are going to be talking about how TCP/IP works, or how the back end of the tech works. And I think it's really awesome where the tooling has come. And even from a Web3 native standpoint, as you mentioned, all of the work that it's taken to get to the EVM, all of the EVM support is so massively important, because you want to make it as easy as possible to onboard and rapidly deploy solutions on Hedera, regardless of what language you code in, regardless of what networks you're used to. So I think it's awesome. I'm really excited about next year, Ed.
Yeah, and on that point of EVM compatibility, I think there's another strong connection to a point that was previously brought up, which is the interoperability, right? And I'm very glad that the contributors, the governance of Hedera realized that interoperability is necessary to avoid that walled garden or closed ecosystem. And so I think by virtue of supporting that EVM on Hedera, developers can easily cross-deploy their applications or completely migrate out of chains that may be suffering performance issues or scalability issues, or even price stability issues, and build on a network that is well governed like Hedera. And so what I've seen in my professional experience is that companies and big enterprises tend to avoid that vendor lock, right? That closed walled garden ecosystem that may become a critical dependency in what you're building and what you're deploying. And they certainly want that optionality that has the big talent pool, the big ecosystem, and enables that interoperability of the solutions that are being built.
I think we're seeing that as a trend in general. I mean, you look at some of these gigantic entities, they are almost intentionally agnostic, which means that, and by agnostic, I mean that they want to basically be able to play wherever they want to play, and they don't want to be siloed in, which is why I think it's so important when you look at a network like Hedera that can support all of that. And as Rob mentioned, like, the trust for all the entities that have been here has already been accomplished. So now it's like, how do we think about going, operational? And I think even Eric mentioned with Hashsphere, which is really interesting. And I don't think a lot of people think this way for, like, maybe not like tomorrow, but within the near future. Really what you're talking about is data to be compliantly flowing between private environments and public environments. So, think about what an enterprise would have to do, or a person would have to do, because certain, portions of our data should definitely stay private, to be able to go into this private environment and then also go onto a public environment where you need to, and it all just kind of seamlessly flows. And I get really excited talking about this stuff, because I think that's the future we're heading towards. And I look at Hedera as being able to facilitate that.
And I love that future. And what I have seen, from evidence, from understanding the market and so on, is that the future is hybrid. Like you said, we're going to have those excellent use cases that need that transparency, that traceability, auditability that a public network like Hedera provides. But then there's also going to be a tremendous need and demand for having data governance, or data sovereignty and privacy, and the ability to interoperate between a private environment, which is what a Hashsphere would provide, and the public ledger, which is what Hedera would enable. And so I'm very glad, to see that this direction is being explored. And then it should be very interesting to see how this all unfolds in 2026 and beyond, for sure.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting. And I think, the biggest thing that take away from me, I guess, over the past year is that vindication isn't the right word. It's like confirmation of, like, all the stuff that, kind of we thought could be possible in some of the real world adoption back in 2020, back in 2019. It's very clear that that's happening. And I just think of a future where, we talked about agentic AI, even to reference the Richard portion of today's kind of closeout of the year. And he talked about agentic AI. And I think even Mance said agent to agent payments. Like, I think of a future where, you're going to have all of these real world assets living on chain, and you're going to be able to use agents to pathfind for liquidity and do all sorts of things. And I don't know what better network than Hedera with all of the services that kind of exist right now that don't silo you. And I think that's a really key point too, is that, not every network, but a lot of networks out there, you either take everything or you take nothing. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting that you can architect your solutions, whether you're just a normal participant or you're trying to build a project or you're an enterprise, in a way that makes sense for you based on what you need to do, whether you need to use consensus or token or whatever the services are. And I think that's really going to play a role of like mass adoption in the future. I just think some of the other things that we've seen tend to silo people into like, I take everything or I take nothing. And I don't think that's the way that it's got to work. So
that's a very good point. And I think, people perhaps don't realize how complementary and composable all of these technologies and solutions are, right? I think back in 2020 and even earlier, Leemon was saying, hey, everything will be tokenized. And today that continues to be true. That vision is unfolding, being implemented by many institutions, and other entities. But the interesting thing is the doors and the possibilities that tokenization opens up, right? Now you will have agents that will be able to transact on those tokenized goods. You open the possibility for secondary markets, perhaps to even, borrow against your tokenized asset. And so it's technologies and solutions that keep building on top of each other. And it really opens up doors for incredible use cases, right? And all of that, let's not forget, it's powered by that core innovation that Richard was talking about, from the consensus service to the token service to all these additional things like hooks and block streams. So it's really interesting to see how all of that, from the technical perspective, lays that foundation for those interesting applications that are unfolding in front of our eyes.
I want to ask you, Ed, and I'll do a soft plug again for this Hedera community survey since it's up on the screen. You guys can scan this QR and fill out your thoughts on where the network is and where it's going. Hedera and all of the entities within Hedera certainly appreciate your responses within this. But I wanted to ask you, Ed, as we kind of ramp down here for the year, you mentioned kind of the flywheel effect of all of the different services that are available on the network. And you sit in an interesting position because you see all of kind of the builders and some of the solutions that they're putting forth. Have you seen kind of an escalation of builders using multiple different services into like a solution or a platform? Or is it a little bit of both, where you still kind of see things that are just like straightforward payments that maybe uses just one thing on Hedera? Like, are you starting to see that flywheel effect in some of the builders and the hackathons as well, with multiple things being used?
You certainly see a lot of that. And especially compared to the early days, people would come, they maybe see the Hedera consensus service, and that's all they would build with. But today, when we go to these hackathons that we host, or perhaps the ones where we participate as part of events, what we see is that people discover, say, Hedera's EVM compatibility, and then they keep exploring. That's a great entry path. And then it triggers the curiosity for people to try to understand what's the consensus service, what's the token service, and what can I actually incorporate into my application that solves a good business problem? What can I incorporate with this technology? And so over the years, we have moved from seeing very narrowly focused solutions to these solutions that incorporate more of the technology to solve much more compelling and much harder market problems. So that has been really interesting to see, that understanding of the developer space of all of these solutions that Hedera has to offer, all of these technologies. Now, we still continue to see, people who might have the determination that they only want to solve something about tokenization, they only need the token service. That's totally fine. But certainly seeing a huge uptick on those people that are adopting multiple technologies and multiple services.
So, and I want to kind of ask you about some of the milestones this year before we ramp down. But before I do, I wanted to ask, because we talked with Richard about Hyro a little bit, but from your standpoint, from a developer relations aspect, is there kind of crossover? Do you get to see some of the stuff that's going on within Hyro? Like, for context, you mentioned what are my favorite things this year. I actually was able to do an interview with somebody that's leveraging, we're starting to test out stuff with Hyro hooks, which I thought was really cool, because it was like, not a whole ton of like followers yet from the account, but I think it's like so early that people don't really realize what hooks would represent in relation to smart contracts. But from Hyro's standpoint, and maybe your broad thoughts on Hyro, that'd be great.
Absolutely. I think Hyro is a key ingredient for the ultimate and long-term adoption of distributed ledger technology and Hedera technology, right? I think it's a fantastic way to reinforce that commitment to open source, but also to welcome a much wider pool of developers and contributors that, you know, either they want to get involved with Web3 and don't know where to start, or maybe experienced developers that want to contribute to a really cool technology, or even those existing projects that want to really contribute to the direction of the network. It's a great pathway to contribute and get involved in this future that we're all building and with this technology. And to be honest, I think Hyro brings a lot of decentralization, transparency, and new ideas, you know, to that innovation that happens on the network. And so certainly one of the best moves that I've seen any network do, right? If you remember in the early days, as Mance said, many folks either hated Hedera, others loved it. And I think there was some criticism around, you know, open source versus not. And I think this shift that Hyro has enabled is, it represents the long journey that Hedera has traveled to be in a much better place, in a much robust place when it comes to governance, contributions, and development of the technology.
So sidebar here, but a huge kudos to you as well. I think you're a Harvard graduate as of this year. Was that correct? Right.
That's correct. Yeah.
I think, you know, what's really interesting to me is that we are kind of headed towards this. I kind of believe that like the next generation of people are really going to, you know, be right in the middle of kind of mass adoption of blockchain. That's not to say there's going to be a ton of adoption before that, because I certainly believe that. But from an educational standpoint, like, what do you think, just from a developer onboarding stance of kind of our youth out there, how important it is to educate them about what's going on with the technology? When you look at educational institutions, I mean, my head goes towards like UCLA and some of the stuff there as far as council is concerned, but just general thoughts, and then maybe tell us a little bit about the hackathons and some of the work this year. And yeah,
absolutely. So a quick note on education. I believe it's an amazing journey that everybody, you know, should feel compelled to explore. I don't think it's a hard requirement for success, but certainly, you know, I've heard many thought leaders say recently that some organizations have to be very big, right? If you want to build a Boeing plane, you have to be Boeing and you have to be very large to be able to do that scale of work. I think in certain areas, that level of education, you know, in-depth education, formal education, is a key enabler, right? If you're trying to lead research fields and solve very complex problems, I think it has its place. I think in the marketplace, education can be a good accelerator, a good enabler, but again, not a hard requirement for success. So for our youth, you know, get educated, but you can also be educated outside of the institutional system. I think the important thing is to have an open mindset, to take action, right? You can read 1,000 books, but until you start actually doing and working day to day on the problems that you're trying to solve, that's what really takes you to the next level in terms of being able to implement and truly learn. That's a side note on education. And then
I remember, I'll give you a quick sidebar. I remember talking to Patches, so Ty, obviously with Hashgraph, a few years ago, and he was saying, just, you know, and this is true, and I've seen this as a trend too, and this makes me really excited. I think a lot of people look at kind of just like the polarizing stuff with blockchain, DLT, and crypto to an extent. I get really excited about the opportunities for like normal people to like literally change their lives if they want to. I remember Pat just saying like, hey, anybody can go and take a Udemy class and learn a little bit of JavaScript and probably get a job in Web3. And I'm like, that's like a crazy opportunity, you know, to even just get certified. So, and I'm at the point now where my kids are getting to the age where like they're starting to talk about college, and I'm like, hey, I'll try to support you with whatever you do, but like, I'd rather pay for a Udemy class than whatever. But anyways, rambling.
Absolutely. I love that point, man. And the other key thing to think about for, you know, the younger generations is AI. That's an incredible ingredient and accelerator that we all have now. And it's like you have a tutor, an assistant that accelerates that learning, you know, process for everything that you may try to learn and build. So don't forget about that tool.
Well, I know that Origins was earlier this year. There was $150,000 in prizes. I think that was like at the beginning of this year. And then Ascension, obviously, which is still kind of, I believe, in the weeds. And yeah, talk to us about, I will say a little bit of a sidebar. One thing that's interesting is if you look at kind of the aggregators for developer activity across blockchain, Hedera has consistently been in the top 5, if not the top 3. And I know as the code shifted over into Hyro, I saw a little bit of a drop off with some of these aggregators, but Hedera came back in. So it looks like they're tracking the right GitHub repos at this point in time, which is good to see. So just your thoughts in general on developer activity, and then maybe walk us out with what's going on with the hackathons in January and beyond.
Sure thing. I think those 2 points are very well connected because hackathons, we're all kind of used to them. We've all heard of them. But why do they matter, right? And I think they are a fantastic vehicle to attract developers and to give them that experience, that feel for what it's like to build and work with the technology, right? It opens those doors to enable that learning that we've been talking about. And all the networking that happens, all the incentives that are given out, all the fun aspects of it, that's what drives people to stay within an ecosystem. And so fantastic vehicle for attracting devs, also engaging them and helping them stay within the industry, within the Hedera ecosystem. And it's always inspiring to see the quality, right? And the competence level that we see in these teams that are building solutions and submitting to these hackathons. So certainly inspiring to stay in touch with those incredible teams. Now, just to give a high level overview of everything that we did this year, we started the trilogy of Hello Future hackathons, 3 chapters. So far, we've completed 2 of those, Origins and Ascension. And overall, in those 3 chapters, over $500,000 in prizes for those winners. So certainly we want to welcome back, existing submitters, existing hackers. Make sure you join for that 3rd chapter that is starting in the first quarter of 2026. And of course, we want to welcome new developers as well, so you can start building on the network. And it wasn't just the trilogy, right? We also had a very successful AI hackathon. We went to over 8 different ETH global events, from Prague to Cannes to Buenos Aires to New York City to Delhi, to engage with EVM developers and get their feedback and put Hedera as a platform for them to build on. And of course, I got to highlight the success of the Africa hackathon that our friends at the Hashgraph group conducted, right? So that was a huge scale effort that was also a massive win for the entire ecosystem. So that's hackathons. I would say the important connection there is to network activity as well. And we're seeing some of that network activity reflected in those market reports that enterprises, that institutions look at. And like you said, Hedera has been ranking well consistently there. And so that's certainly a good proxy and a good indicator of the level of investment that goes into the network, the level of engagement, and the health of an ecosystem. So certainly we want to keep that up. And we know, again, that those institutions and enterprises are looking at those reports, to decide what network and what ecosystem to get involved with. But that's not all, right? I think we also have another proxy that I want to point people to, and that's another one that we've been looking at very actively, which is the testnet. Almost every developer that is sane, who ends up in the mainnet, has to go through the testnet, right? That's where you build risk-free with little to no cost. And so we're able to measure that, and it's been incredible to see the amount of growth that has happened in the testnet, compared to last year, going from a few thousand developers to tens of thousands of developers onboarding into the testnet and staying active there. So, we have that first-party data, or I guess that decentralized, open, transparent database that is the public testnet. And then there's also the market reports that validate what we're seeing on the testnet itself, which is high levels of activity in the developer ecosystem.
Well, I want to, from my standpoint, and then I'll let you close us out here, Ed, because there's nobody better served to do it. I certainly want to thank everybody from Hedera, Hashgraph, Hedera Foundation, Hashgraph Association and Group, Exponential Science Foundation, all of the entities that are involved within the Hedera ecosystem, all of the council members, certainly, and all of the builders and developers. A huge shout out to all the community members. I think that, there's just way too many people to be kind of named. And I'm certainly humbled and grateful to be able to host something like this at the end of the year. So a huge shout out and thank you to all of our panelists today. Between Leemon Baird, Mance Harmon, Eric Piscini, we had Kamal Yousefi, we had Charles Adkins, then we had Richard Bair, we had Carlos and Gaurang from ioBuilders, and Bonzo, Richard, obviously the VP of Software Engineering. I want to give a huge shout out to Rob Allen and Simon, head of Chaircom, and Ed. It's always great to have you here as well. And I'm looking forward to kind of our next ramp down or closing ceremony for these hackathons, which are always so cool to see the builders and to see their evolution, if they're repeat builders, to see the new builders, to see what areas are kind of emerging from the builder economy standpoint. And yeah, just really humbled and grateful to be able to host this. And Ed, nobody better served than you to ramp us down, sir. And yeah, I'll let you close us out here. And then I think there's a video for HederaCon.
Excellent. Thank you, Ryan. I also want to thank you, man. You've been an incredible part of this ecosystem. And, we certainly appreciate you helping us bring this type of content to the community. So what I will say to close is that when we reflect back, right, and we look at that period from 2017 to this year, I see those years as the foundation being laid out, right? Because what comes from here, I think it's all about leveraging that strong foundation and that solid foundation that has been leveraged over the past 8 years. From the mature governance, right, to the incredible technical innovations, to the alignment in branding that happened. I think it took a long time for us to get here where, the ecosystem makes a lot of sense and there's a unified front. Also, we heard from folks about the accelerated enterprise and institutional adoption that is going to bring new use cases to Hedera and Web3. Also, the regulatory clarity is another key point. So where I'm going is that all the ingredients, are in place for the industry to have a fantastic trajectory going forward in terms of adoption, in terms of real business value and problems solved. We also talked about the thriving developer activity and ecosystem, the world-class tools, and the incredible job that our business or ecosystem development organizations are doing, right? The Hashgraph Group and the Hedera Foundation. And so, what comes next? What is there to be optimistic about in the following years? One, I want to plug Hedera Dev Day. So that's going to happen February 17th. That's going to be a developer event co-located with ETH Denver. So make sure you go to hedera.com/devday and you can register, join us there in Denver in February of 2026 to get into deep dives about technology, workshops that are going to be hands-on, and also talk to community projects and Hedera experts and so much more. The other piece that I would say is let's think about long-term, right? Because when we think about that foundation that is being laid out, what's coming ahead of us, think long-term, because it's very easy to get lost in those short-term cycles and oscillations, right? I think of it as AI. AI right now is the worst that it's ever going to be. Hopefully it gets only better from here on. And Web3 has the same type of potential, right? I think from now on, we're only going to see more adoption, more clarity in terms of use cases, more value delivered to the real world. And with Web3, it's interesting because there's that price component, which makes us susceptible, to those markets up and downs. But if you filter out that noise and focus on the adoption, the opportunity to build real use cases and drive actual innovation, I think the future looks very bright for Hedera. So that's the part that I like to stay focused on. And finally, just to close, I do want to take another moment to, think back to a point that Eric Piscini made earlier. And, from the moment that Leemon invented the Hashgraph and started this whole journey with Mance, right? It's been an incredible journey, and reflecting back on everything that's happened in just 8 years. Like, it's incredible the pace of fast innovation, of growth that the ecosystem has had in just 8 years. And so where I'm going is that it takes a village, even if it's a global village, right? Of community, of builders, of core contributors, of council members, of ecosystem entities. And so it's been amazing to be able to work with all these folks. And of course, it takes also an amazing team at Hashgraph. I'm very blessed to work with pretty awesome teams. And finally, I do want to call out our DevRel community team, Fermin, Luis in the back scenes or in the background, enabling this type of content for the community. So with that, I really want to thank everybody for a fantastic year, for tuning in, and happy holidays if you all celebrate.